Chapter 646. Despite his old age, Qing Ji was a sincere and talkative man. After a few exchanges, he managed to strike up a conversation with Lin Jin and took the initiative to learn more about Middle-earth. Their conversation was in full swing. Lin Jin explained the current situation to Akiji as well. Akiji wore a look of awe as he listened, mesmerized. When he heard that Middle-earth had long lost its immortals and instead blood pacts were flourishing, Qing Ji's eyes widened. What's the theory behind blood pacts? Lin Jin could tell that this old man was a curious person. Blood pacts weren't a secret, and almost everyone in Middle-earth knew about it. Lin Jin explained it to Qing Ji, and the latter listened attentively. Sometimes he would ponder, and sometimes he would nod. Unknowingly, both of them had lost track of time. It was already late at night. At this moment, there was a crisp sound of a bird chirping outside. It seemed to be the lonely chirping of a bird on a branch. It sounded very casual, but Akiji was obviously stunned when he heard it. He immediately calculated the time and then slapped his forehead. "Mr. Lin, I didn't know it was already so late." As he spoke, he quickly got up. Lin Jin smiled. "It's fine. I can't sleep anyway, so it's good to chat for a while." Qing Ji casually glanced outside the window before saluting him. "It's getting late. Please rest early, Mr. Lin. I won't disturb you any further. I shall take my leave now." Lin Jin could tell that the old man had something to do, so he didn't say much. He merely responded, and the old man turned to leave. A breeze suddenly blew outside the yard. Lin Jin poked his head out, but Qing Ji was nowhere to be seen. He must have left on the wind. Leaving in such a hurry. Is there something urgent? Lin Jin mumbled to himself. Having said that, he shook his head and prepared to return to his room. He wasn't really interested in what Qing Ji was going to do. But just as he was about to head back, his nose twitched and he stopped. Monster aura. Although it was faint and mixed with a floral fragrance, it couldn't escape Lin Jin's nose. As a beast appraiser, Lin Jin's eyes and nose were the sharpest. Coupled with his extensive knowledge, he wouldn't let go of even the most overlooked details. Just like that fleeting trace of demonic qi just now. Interesting. Lin Jin frowned, but his eyes glinted with curiosity and contemplation. The old man who left in a hurry must have something to do with that trace of monster energy. Of course, this was just Lin Jin's guess. He had no idea if it was true. Lin Jin, who was about to return to his house, was suddenly filled with curiosity. He wanted to follow them and see what Akiji was up to. He wanted to find out the source of the monster energy. But on second thought, why bother? Maybe his curiosity this time would cause more trouble. After all, he was a guest at the Xiandao sect, so it wasn't good for him to cause too much trouble. It's better to keep a low profile. If I'm not curious or impulsive, there won't be any more trouble. Lin Jin calmed himself down and returned to the house. All he needed to do now was wait quietly. Once Miao Yin used his celestial spiritual energy to refine the purple thunder god needle, it would be his biggest gain. Then he would be able to cure the Qilint's injury. Not only would he get a favor from the Xiandao sect, but he would also get a celestial treasure like the purple thunder god needle. That was the most important thing. After returning to his house, Lin Jin poured some tea and started reading again. Although he was only a dabbler in immortal cultivation, he was still much stronger than the average person. With the support of his blood contract with his pet beast, Lin Jin could stay awake for days on end without a problem. Especially after his battle with Ghost Eye Granny, his psyche had been strengthened, making it even easier. After reading for about 2 hours, Lin Jin heard a sudden gust of wind from outside, followed by a knock on the door. From the sound, the person knocking on the door was obviously anxious, but seemed to be trying to suppress it. "Come in." Lin Jin knew who it was from that gust of wind. Other than Akiji, there was no one else. Sure enough, Akiji pushed the door open and entered with a suppressed urgency. "What is it?" Lin Jin put down the book in his hand and looked up to ask. With a plop, Akiji fell to his knees. "Mr. Lin, I have something I need your help with." Lin Jin quickly got up and helped the old man up. Although the old man addressed him as Mr. Lin and was a disciple sent by Chan Xinkong to take care of Lin Jin, The old man's age and level were still there so Lin Jin wouldn't put on airs. What happened? Lin Jin asked in detail. Akiji hesitated for a while. Perhaps because the matter was urgent. He sighed and said, Mr. Lin, to tell you the truth, this is what happened. With a red face, Akiji told Lin Jin everything that happened. As Lin Jin listened, an odd expression appeared on his face. It was no wonder Akiji was so hesitant earlier. Logically speaking, if a Xian Dao sect disciple was in trouble, he should have sought help from the sect first instead of Lin Jin, a guest. Based on this point alone, Akiji's request for help must be extraordinary. Sure enough, that was the case. It turned out that in the past, Akiji couldn't stand the loneliness and got to know a female demon. Immortals weren't the only ones in the foreign lands. Many Yao cultivators lived here as well. Although many of them were ferocious beasts who hadn't developed intelligence, there were also Yao cultivators who had developed intelligence and obtained exquisite cultivation methods. The one Akiji knew was a 1,000-year-old Oriole monster. In other words, she was a bird. This female demon had been cultivating for 1,000 years and could already transform into a human. Her cultivation level wasn't weak either. After getting to know Akiji, they saw each other as close friends and became partners. However, the Xian Dao sect was a famous sect in the Celestial Dao sect. Although they didn't forbid befriending demon cultivators, it was still too exciting and out of line for them to cultivate together. Therefore, Qing Ji had to hide this matter from his sect. Normally, he would meet up with the Oriole demon in private to relieve their loneliness. Today was also the day that this pair of ill-fated Mandarin ducks would meet in secret. However, because Akiji and Lin Jin were having a good time talking, they forgot about the time. This caused the outspoken Oriole monster to be unhappy and come over to remind Lin Jin. It was the bird chirping that Lin Jin heard before. Initially, this matter should have ended here, but who knew that something would go wrong? My partner, Shishi, offended another powerful demon without knowing it. She didn't think much of it when she was injured by that demon, but just now, she suddenly vomited blood and fell unconscious. I used a spell, but it didn't work. I don't know why, but seeing that she was about to die, I suddenly remembered that Mr. Lin is a beast appraiser and that you have supernatural powers to treat beasts. Lin Jin finally understood. Speaking of which, it was because of what Lin Jin had told Akiji that he made up his mind to seek help. Lin Jin didn't decline. As a beast appraiser, it was only normal for him to lend a helping hand in situations like this. It was just like how a doctor treated a patient. Moreover, Akiji had come to Lin Jin's door for help. The old man was a nice person who didn't have any malicious intent, so Lin Jin could just treat his help as a good deed. Chapter 647. Come, bring me there. At Lin Jin's words, Aoji was overjoyed. He was already prepared to be rejected, but to think that Mr. Lin would agree to help without hesitation. The old man excitedly led the way. Once they were outside the yard, Aoji invoked a spell, stirring up a breeze. With a smile, Lin Jin summoned a cloud and flew up. Aoji then realized that Lin Jin was proficient in the art of riding clouds, and it was almost on par with his own wind manipulation spell. His admiration for Lin Jin grew. The two of them flew out of the yard one after another. With Aoji leading the way, they finally landed at the back mountain of Xian Dao sect. After they landed, there was no one around. The Oriole monster that Aoji mentioned was nowhere to be seen. Aoji was shocked. Flustered, he landed and looked around. Lin Jin noticed that there was indeed a pool of blood on the ground in front of him. There was a faint demonic aura coming from it. Approaching it, Lin Jin probed it with a needle and immediately entered the Oriole monster's information into the Museum of Deadly Beasts. Rank 6 monster, Oriole, proficient in shape-shifting and sound wave spells. Currently severely injured. There are 5 ways to treat her, namely, Lin Jin took a closer look. While the monster's injury was strange, it wasn't much of a problem for him. Although it wouldn't be an easy task, it wouldn't take much effort. Just this pool of blood told Lin Jin that Aoji was telling the truth. But where was this Oriole monster now? Aoji was clearly panicking. Despite his immortal body, sweat was dripping down his forehead. What's going on? I told her to wait again. Why is she gone? Aoji couldn't wait any longer. Hardening his heart, he took out a talisman. The talisman was simple and unadorned. It must have been written a long time ago, and the person who wrote it must have a high cultivation level. This item was given to me by an expert 1,000 years ago. Today it's time to use it, Aoji said. With a wave of his hand, he cast a spell. The talisman flew out and hovered in the air. The next moment, the talisman vibrated. The empty air around them began to ripple like water. The ripples grew larger and larger like a mirror on the surface of the water. Sun and moon reverse, borrow the power of heaven and earth. Divine talisman of the past, appear. Aoji chanted through gritted teeth. Then, he joined his fingers together and pointed forward. Boom! A strange sound rang out as the talisman, suspended in the air, immediately ignited. The strange thing was that the surrounding ripples actually slowly calmed down. However, the scene that was revealed was completely different. It was as if he was looking at the past through a huge mirror. Or rather, it was something that had happened before. In the image, a yellow-clothed woman fell to the ground and vomited blood. Next to her, Akiji looked anxious. After the two of them said a few words, the woman fainted. Akiji was extremely anxious. Later, he seemed to have thought of something and settled the woman down. He set up a simple concealment technique and left. This should be what Akiji said before. Sure enough, he didn't hide anything. However, not long after Akiji left, a strange figure appeared in the same place. It seemed to have appeared out of thin air, giving people the feeling that the other party had been there for a long time, but neither Akiji nor Huang Ying had noticed it before. The figure's appearance could not be seen clearly, but it was wearing a black robe. Then, it waved its hand, and a black wind swept Huang Ying away. Then, it leaped backward and disappeared without a trace. Old man Akiji's eyes widened so much that the veins on his forehead were bulging. He was obviously ready to kill. After all, no one would be able to keep their composure if their beloved companion was abducted and they didn't even know if she was dead or alive. It was the same for immortals. Immortals were humans too. That person's cultivation level is extraordinary. He was here all along. Akiji, you should report this to the sect and let spiritual master Miaoyan decide, Lin Jin suggested. This was the most suitable choice. Although this was the back mountain of Xiandao sect, a place between the outside world and the sect, they should report this matter first. Anyway, Lin Jin believed that since the other party had left, there was no way to find him. So what if they could find him? Based on the projection of the talisman, that black-robed man was definitely stronger than Akiji. It was the same for Lin Jin. Hence, reporting it to the sect was the best choice. However, Akiji was hesitant and anxious. He knew that even if he reported this to the sect now, nothing would come of it. His secret rendezvous with Huang Ying was already a violation of the sect's rules. If he reported this to the sect, he wouldn't end up well. However, Akiji knew that there was nothing he could do now. Just as Mr. Lin had said, that black-robed man's strength was unfathomable and his whereabouts were mysterious. It wouldn't be easy to find any clues, and Akiji couldn't possibly rescue Huang Ying on his own. Hence, reporting this to the sect was the best choice. Even if he had to be punished by the sect, Akiji would accept it. Lin Jin could tell that Akiji was troubled, so he said, "Don't worry. If I meet spiritual master Miao, Yin, or Chun Shinkong, I'll speak up for you." Akiji quickly thanked him. However, a voice suddenly came from the side. "You're a beast appraiser? Interesting." At the same time, a gust of black wind suddenly appeared beneath Lin Jin's feet. Unable to react in time, Lin Jin was swept up by the gust of black wind. In the blink of an eye, he was sent flying out of Xiandao sect and into the miasma outside. It was so fast that forget Lin Jin, even Akiji couldn't react in time. By the time he did, Lin Jin had already been abducted. *T. Akiji was truly frightened out of his wits this time. If it was just Huang Ying being abducted, it would be a big deal to him. But to the sect, it was nothing. But now, Mr. Lin had been abducted. This was a huge deal. As a disciple of Xiandao sect, How could Akiji not know that Mr. Lin was invited here to treat Mr. Chi? Who was Mr. Chi? Akiji couldn't possibly not know. Even if he wanted to give chase, there was no way he could. In an instant, he felt as if he had been hit on the head with a stick. He was so frightened that he couldn't even stand straight. However, Akiji was an immortal after all. He reacted almost immediately and cast a spell without hesitation. A ray of light flew out and exploded in the sky. This was a special talisman used by Xian Dao sect disciples. It was only used when the sect was in danger. Other than that, it shouldn't be used carelessly, because upon seeing this message, no matter who it was, no matter what they were doing, even if they were in the most critical moment of their seclusion or about to go berserk, they had to come out. One could imagine how severe the sect's punishment would be if they used this incorrectly. However, Akiji knew that he had to use it now. At this stage, Mr. Lin's abduction was the most important matter. He couldn't delay any longer and had to inform the sect immediately. Sure enough, the loud noise alarmed Xian Dao sect. Chapter 648. The lightning talisman shook the sky. Immediately, the patrolling disciples flew over, followed by various beams of light and magical treasures. Chen Xiankong arrived quickly. When he saw Akiji, who was so frightened that he couldn't even stand straight and was covered in cold sweat, he knew the situation was far from good. Junior brother Qingji, what happened? Chen Xiankong immediately asked. He knew very well that if it wasn't for something major, Qingji would never dare to use that alarm talisman. Just as he finished asking, before Qingji could speak, a higher-level immortal from Xian Dao sect arrived. Several peak pseudo-immortal elders, Mr. Qi, and finally, spiritual master Miao Yin arrived with a dark expression. He was obviously at a critical moment in the refinement process, so it was his avatar that came. Although it was just an avatar, its strength was still at the level of a true immortal. After all, spiritual master Miao Yin was the face of Xian Dao sect, the sect's pillar of support. Without his strength, Xian Dao sect would have been destroyed thousands of times. Seeing that spiritual master Miao Yin and Mr. Qi had arrived, the disciples quickly bowed. Qingji finally came back to his senses. He quickly knelt on the ground and told them what happened. He didn't dare to hide anything now, including his relationship with Huang Yingfe. If he continued to hide anything, he wouldn't be able to forgive himself. If the sect found out about it in the future, his fate would be even worse. Hence, Qingji didn't dare to hide anything now. Hearing that Lin Jin was kidnapped by an unknown person, Chen Xiankong trembled. Spiritual Master Miao Yin was also shocked, and his expression changed drastically. As for Mr. Qi, his expression was even worse. No matter who it is, anyone who kidnaps an important guest of Xian Dao sect is declaring war against the sect. Spiritual Master Miao Yan's avatar looked gloomy as he gave the order. Soon, the entire Xian Dao sect was mobilized to search for information. Spiritual Master Miao Yin was confident. Although the foreign land was vast, Xian Dao sect was a supreme existence here. It was impossible for Xian Dao sect to not be able to find a person they were looking for. Of course, Spiritual Master Miao Yin knew very well that the person who dared to do such a thing in Xian Dao sect's territory must have something to rely on. Whether it was his means or cultivation, he wasn't someone an average immortal could compare to. But so what? Lin Jin was no ordinary person. He was the hope of Xian Dao sect's rise and the key to the Qilin's recovery. Moreover, if something were to happen to Lin Jin and Xian Dao sect, the curator backing him up would never let the matter rest. Once this carefree immortal flared up, Xian Dao sect would have to bear the consequences. Even if it was only for the sake of justice, Spiritual Master Miao Yin had to save Lin Jin. The Xian Dao sect, this giant force, had begun to move. Without a doubt, this move by the Xian Dao sect would stir up the entire foreign battleground. Perhaps there would be another bloody storm. Lin Jin could think of all these. But at this moment, he didn't have time to think about this. At this moment, Lin Jin was under the control of a powerful spell. He couldn't even move his arms. It was as if his body was wrapped in a rope made of condensed black wind. According to Lin Jin's understanding of strength, this power was probably more than 5,000 pounds. Fortunately, Lin Jin was different from the average person. Had he been an average person, he would have been strangled to death by the black wind rope. Even so, Lin Jin didn't feel good. His surroundings were shrouded in a black aura. He couldn't see what was happening outside, but he could feel that he was being moved rapidly. Who would be so bold as to do this? Although Lin Jin was panicking, it didn't stop him from thinking. Now that he realized what was going on, the culprit must have been there all along. He must have secretly taken Huang Ying away using some special method and was hiding nearby, waiting for Akiji to bring him over. Truth be told, if Lin Jin didn't think Akiji was innocent, he would have suspected that this person was colluding with Akiji to harm him. But that shouldn't be the case. Akiji didn't know about this. If he did, he would have used a more time-saving method. But this only served to accentuate this mysterious person's prowess. It wasn't just his supernatural powers and realm, it also included his schemes and schemes. Things don't look good for me this time, Lin Jin muttered to himself. He began to think about what he should do next. Truth be told, it wasn't impossible for him to break free from this black wind rope. At least, if he used his 2 blood contract beasts and the breezy monster sword, he might have a chance of breaking free. However, Lin Jin felt that it was too risky. Lin Jin could sense that the mysterious person was nearby. In fact, he was just inches away. If he acted rashly, even if he managed to break free, he might be struck by the mysterious person's thunderous attacks. Lin Jin knew nothing about this mysterious person, so he had to be cautious. For now, he could only assume that the other party was an unknown true immortal expert. If he was a true immortal, Lin Jin wouldn't be able to handle him. Hence, the best strategy was to not act rashly. Lin Jin told himself to stay calm and not panic. The other party clearly didn't intend to kill him, and he didn't think they had any grudges. Now, it seemed like the other party must have some ulterior motive for abducting him. But no matter what, Lin Jin had some use for him. This way, Lin Jin would have enough time to deal with the situation. With this in mind, Lin Jin didn't panic as much as before. He even calmed down a lot. Aside from the fact that he had some emergency measures and trump cards, he could also open the visitation hall's door. If push came to shove, he could just hide inside the visitation hall. No matter how powerful the mysterious person was, they wouldn't be able to find him. Also, after learning that Lin Jin was abducted, Xian Dao sect would surely mobilize their entire force. Spiritual Master Miao Yan was a true immortal expert, so with him around, it was only a matter of time before he was found. With this in mind, Lin Jin realized that he had nothing to panic about. Instead, Lin Jin was curious. He wanted to find out who had abducted him and what their goal was. Moments later, Lin Jin felt himself coming to a stop. The next instant, the black fog around him dissipated. Sure enough, the cloaked man was right next to him. However, he was no longer in Xian Dao sect. Instead, he was in a dark place filled with strange vines. Besides the black-robed man, Lin Jin also saw the other party using the same spell to control a woman. Huang Ying. Lin Jin had seen in the past, so he recognized it at first glance. Not a bait. A thought popped into Lin Jin's mind. He had assumed that the black-robed man was deliberately targeting Huang Ying to lure him out. Now, it seemed like that wasn't the case. Ghostwood Cage, rise. Just then, the black-robed man cast a spell, and Lin Jin saw many vines emerge from beneath his feet. As if they were alive, they quickly formed a cage around him, trapping Lin Jin and Huang Ying inside. Once he was done, the black-robed man turned to glance at Lin Jin before disappearing in a flash. Chapter 649. When the spell was cast, the man disappeared. Needless to say, the black-robed man's escape skill was cool, and there was no hesitation at all. Even Lin Jin wanted to learn from him. The man left. This meant that it wasn't time for him to lay his cards on the table yet, or he wasn't ready yet. Also, the black-robed man was clearly confident. Did he think he could trap Lin Jin with the dark wind chain and the ghostwood cage? Lin Jin tried to break free only to find that he couldn't. Even his pet beast's strength was useless. It was a situation where he was stronger than his pet beast. Lin Jin even used spell negation to no avail. Needless to say, Lin Jin's spell casting level was too far apart. They weren't even on the same level. Should he use the breezy sword? With that thought in mind, the breezy sword around Lin Jin's waist transformed into a beam of sword light and slashed at the dark wind chain. Lin Jin's heart sank. It couldn't be cut. Even if he tried to break the ghostwood cage, it would still be the same. He couldn't break through the man's defense. This ghostwood cage was strange to be able to withstand the breezy sword's sword energy. After all, the breezy sword was already at the level of an immortal sword. It was no wonder the black-robed man was so confident. He clearly had Lin Jin in his grasp. All right. Lin Jin temporarily gave up on resisting and took a look around. Truth be told, Lin Jin suspected that the black-robed man hadn't left yet and might still be lurking around. Just like when he ambushed Lin Jin. After waiting for a while, there was still no movement. Lin Jin was out of ideas. Besides using the visitation hall's door, he had no other trump card, and he had no intention of using it right away. So he waited. The man must have a reason for abducting him. Why should he be in such a hurry? He might as well wait for the man to spill the beans. This wait went on for several hours. In this strange forest, there was no change of day and night. It was always dark, and the only light came from the glowing fruits hanging from the vines overhead. It was as if there were countless dim light bulbs hanging overhead. Just then, the black-robed man returned. With a gust of black wind, the black-robed man and an old man appeared out of thin air. This supernatural skill was truly impressive. The black-robed man glanced at Lin Jin before walking over to Huang Ying with the old man. "Old Monster Su, that's her." The black-robed man spoke. His voice was low, and it carried a type of arrogance and gloominess. There was also a wave of viciousness. There was no need to ask to know that this was definitely a ferocious person. The old man at the side was also quite strange. He was definitely an immortal, but his hair was messy, his back was hunched, and his skin was like an old tree. It was more like the skin of a toad that had lived for hundreds of years. The colors were different, and there were tumors on his skin. In any case, no matter how one looked at him, he looked very awkward. Just by looking at his appearance, one could tell that he was not a proper immortal. The old man called Old Monster Su was a man of few words. He walked over, and the black-robed man used a spell to disperse the ghostwood cage. The old man reached out and placed his finger on Huang Yin's wrist. Lin Jin was an expert. Although he was still a distance away, he could tell that Old Monster Su was a divine physician. Lin Jin was curious as well. He wanted to see how this divine physician would treat him. Soon, the ugly old monster Su frowned and put on an even uglier appearance. "How did you get hurt so badly?" This question was clearly directed at the black-robed man. The latter answered, "It was just an accident. Black water wasn't used to using Ghost Hand, so he used a little too much force. Also, this Huang Yin is quite capable, so it was inevitable that she would get hurt in a fight." Ghost Hand? Is that the famous artifact of the Ghost Hand Demon Lord? You actually gave this artifact to your new disciple? Old Monster Su looked shocked. The black-robed man laughed heartily and removed his hood, revealing his true appearance. His eyes were cold, and he wore a crown with 3 skulls and 100 towers. His face was long, and he had a long beard. Dressed in a black robe, he held a horsetail whisk in his hand. His domineering immortal aura was intimidating. "Ghost Hand may be good, but it's just an artifact. It's nothing to me. Let's not talk about this." Old Monster Su, Huang Yin is indispensable if you want to recite a heavenly incantation. "She can't die. I don't care what you do. You have to save her," the black-robed man insisted. Old Monster Su pondered for a moment before continuing his treatment. However, it was clearly ineffective. Although Lin Jin didn't treat her, he could tell that Old Monster Su was quite capable. After all, he was an immortal. Moreover, the fact that the black-robed man invited him here meant that his medical skills were far superior to the famous doctors Lin Jin knew. In fact, he might even be better than Lin Jin. For Old Monster Su to have such a headache, this injury must be difficult to treat. It could even be said that there was no way to treat it. But Lin Jin was an exception. Huang Yin was a monster cultivator, so the Museum of Deadly Beasts was in charge. In other words, no matter the injury, the museum could provide a treatment plan. While Lin Jin was contemplating, Old Monster Su shook his head and said, "This demoness injury is too severe." Ghost Hand tore her heart veins apart. "Forget me. Even if the miracle doctor was still alive, he wouldn't be able to save her. Find a place to bury her. You don't even need her soul anymore, since it's already shattered." At this, the black-robed man's expression darkened. Lin Jin understood now. Huang Yin was dead meat. Lin Jin was hesitant about whether he should help. He already knew about Huang Yin's condition through the blood test. Her condition was indeed severe, extremely so. However, there were still several ways to save her. The most difficult part was having her soul torn apart. It was also because of this that Old Monster Su couldn't save her. Otherwise, he wouldn't have said that she couldn't be saved. Lin Jin's spirit refinement needle happened to be the best method to mend one's soul. In other words, as long as Lin Jin helped, Huang Yin would definitely survive. Lin Jin was confident in this. Just as Lin Jin was contemplating, the black-robed man seemed to have remembered something. He turned to look at Lin Jin before walking over. Once he was close, the black-robed man lifted his hand to dispel the ghostwood cage. Not only that, but the dark wind chains binding Lin Jin disappeared as well. Old Monster Su looked curious as he glanced over. While Lin Jin seemed calm, he was already mentally prepared. If this black-robed Taoist tried to harm him, he would immediately open the visitation hall's door and escape. However, Lin Jin wasn't sure if the man had any means to stop him. After all, this man was a genuine immortal expert. If he couldn't even open the visitation hall's door, then Lin Jin was truly out of ideas. But now, he could only take it one step at a time. But to Lin Jin's surprise, the black-robed Taoist stopped 5 steps away and saluted him. "Appraiser Lin, I've heard so much about you. If I've offended you in the past, Lord God Mastiff would like to apologize." Chapter 650. Sure enough, the man knew who he was. In other words, just as Lin Jin had guessed, he had a plan for kidnapping Lin Jin. However, Lin Jin couldn't understand it. When had he ever seen a kidnapper apologizing to his hostage? He said that the other party was polite, and he seemed to be quite polite now. However, would a polite person do something like forcefully abduct people like before? Hence, this was just a facade, something the man did on purpose. Lin Jin didn't move. He simply stared at the black-robed man, waiting to see what he would do next. I heard that Appraiser Lin is an expert in beast diagnosis. Whether Huang Ying lives or dies depends on whether Appraiser Lin is willing to save her. Having said that, Lord God Yin reached out and grabbed the air. Huang Ying's body was instantly lifted by an invisible force and brought before Lin Jin. Before Lin Jin could say anything, Old Monster Su panicked. "What bullsh*** Appraiser Lin? If I say I can't save someone, then no one in this world can," Old Monster Su said with a dark expression. Then, he turned to Lord God Yin and said, "Lord God Yin, are you humiliating me on purpose?" Lord God Yin shook his head. "I didn't mean it that way. Old Monster Su, Appraiser Lin is different from you. Although he's immortal, he comes from Middle-earth. Nowadays, beast cultivators are prevalent in Middle-earth, and this beast appraiser has a unique way of treating beasts. I'm only letting him give it a try. After all, as long as there's a sliver of a chance, we must save Huang Ying." It was obvious that Old Monster Su was afraid of Sir Godgu. However, he obviously didn't intend to back off when it came to such a professional problem. The old man squinted his eyes and said with a gloomy face, "It's understandable that Sir God has such an idea. However, I will say the same thing again. If I, Old Monster Su, say that I can't save him, it's impossible for anyone to save him. It's just a waste of time." "What way?" "Based on what I know, there are only 2 people who can chant Heaven's Path incantation. One is Huang Ying, and the other is Xian Dao Sek's Sage Miao Yin. Since only these 2 have cultivated the supernatural Dermikim, are you saying that we should look for Sage Miao Yin?" Lord God Yin asked with obvious murderous intent. Old Devil Su was startled. But Huang Ying's situation is also the truth. I didn't hurt her. Even if you want to pursue the matter, you should look for your disciple's fault. Listening to their conversation, Lin Jin felt conflicted. He thought to himself that he must have heard a lot of things that could kill him. Could it be that the other party would kill him to silence him and destroy the evidence? That was a possibility. Lin Jin knew that the man was threatening him by saying all this. He was implying that if he couldn't save Huang Ying, he might be silenced immediately. Lin Jin had always wanted to save Huang Ying. Firstly, he was a beast appraiser, so how could he leave her in the lurch? Secondly, he had promised Qing Ji that he would save her, in order to protect himself. Although he still did not know why the other party had kidnapped him, it might be to save Huang Ying. If that was the case, if he said he could not save her, it was very likely that he would immediately meet with misfortune. Also, Lin Jin's curiosity was piqued. First, how did this god, Lord Gu, know about him? He even knew about beast appraisers, which meant that someone must have told him about it. Who told him that? To answer these questions, Lin Jin decided to make a move. At this, Lin Jin said, "Let me try." Having said that, he lowered his head to touch Huang Ying. God Lord Gu immediately looked over, an inexplicable glint in his eyes. Beside him, old monster Su looked infuriated and in disbelief. "You're just an ant putting on an act. I like to see how you're going to cover up your lies later. Let me tell you, Sir God Yan's methods are extremely cruel. By then, you'll definitely beg for death." Old monster Su's voice rang in Lin Jin's ears. However, this was clearly a form of voice transmission. Old monster Su was still wary of God Lord Gu, so he could only use this method to vent his dissatisfaction. It was the same logic as an intern nurse suddenly claiming that she could cure an illness that even the department head of a hospital had declared incurable. This was a slap to the face, a challenge to authority. One could imagine how much old monster Su hated Lin Jin because of this incident. Lin Jin wasn't one to be intimidated. Frankly speaking, if it weren't for a true immortal like God Lord Gu, Lin Jin might not be old monster Su's match if he were to fight him. Lin Jin's treasures and 2 powerful pet beasts were enough to defeat some hollow immortals. Without this ability, Lin Jin couldn't possibly have ventured into the foreign lands. Since Lin Jin wouldn't respond, he re-examined Huang Ying's condition and found that it was the same as the blood test. Hence, he immediately used the spirit refinement needle and pierced it into Huang Ying's body. The first thing he had to do was to mend her soul. Had it been anyone else, they wouldn't have been able to treat her. But with the spirit refinement needle, this was much easier for Lin Jin. While using the needle, Lin Jin was always fully focused. Old monster Su and God Lord Gu could only watch quietly from the side. The difference was that the former had a look of disdain, while the latter had a look of anticipation. Mending one's soul wasn't easy. It was a meticulous task that couldn't tolerate any carelessness. Lin Jin had entered a state of oblivion. It was as if he wasn't in the dangerous, creepy forest, but in Maple City, in the consultation hall of the Beast Appraisal Association. Her concentration made Sir God Gao nod his head faintly. Old monster Su, who was next to him, had a solemn expression. As time passed, the disdain on old monster Su's face gradually disappeared. He had the aura observation skill. At that very moment, he saw that Huang Ying's aura, which had originally dispersed, was showing signs of gathering again. How was this possible? Could he be able to mend one's soul? Old monster Su was indeed an immortal physician. He was experienced and knowledgeable. At this moment, he thought of a possibility and immediately reached out to flick Huang Ying's wrist. Old monster Su's expression instantly changed. At first, he was in disbelief. Then he was shocked. It was as though he had seen something unbelievable. Then he struggled as though he was trying to find a loophole. In the end, he was beaten black and blue. One could even faintly see a trace of admiration in his eyes that he had deliberately concealed. Right now, old monster Su was more excited than anyone else. He glanced at God Lord Gu to see no reaction from him. Then, he looked at Lin Jin to see that the latter didn't say a word either. Lin Jin was focused on repairing his soul. Old Monster Su was relieved. He continued to use his immortal technique to investigate the process of repairing the divine soul. Although he couldn't see too clearly with his immortal technique, it was enough for him. What he saw today had overturned everything he had known for thousands of years. In an instant, Old Monster Su was filled with disgust and indignation. He even had the urge to strangle this mortal ant to death. How could an ant have such supernatural powers? Chapter 651. However, Old Monster Su didn't dare to do anything. Not even Lord Gu would allow him to do so. Moreover, Old Monster Su himself wouldn't do such a thing. He was rational and had a thirst for knowledge. Although he didn't know what kind of soul-repairing technique this was, Old Monster Su's desire to learn it had reached a point where he couldn't suppress it any longer. Perhaps this mortal ant was the only one in this world who knew how to do it. But if this mortal ant died, how could Old Monster Su learn it? Old Monster Su kept these thoughts to himself. Right now, he was carefully observing the entire process of Lin Jin's soul-repairing process, even if he couldn't see it clearly. Time ticked by. Just then, a spark flew over from afar like a speeding fireball. When it got close, the fireball suddenly expanded to reveal a monk dressed in a flaming kasaya. The monk was bald, but his eyebrows and beard were all fiery red, and he had a pair of glaring eyes. The Buddhist beads around his neck were all irregular fire crystals, emitting scorching heat. They had a kind of power of death, but they were incomparably beautiful. The best gems would lose their luster in front of these Buddhist beads. The monk held a sun and moon spade in his hand. After landing, the flames on his body gradually subsided. However, his clothes and the Buddha beads still glowed with fire energy. It was a mystical sight. Monk Huiyuan, why are you here? Lord Gu was clearly surprised. However, he was clearly familiar with this monk, so he stepped forward and asked. The monk lowered his head to look at Huang Ying, then at Lin Jin, and finally at Old Monster Su. He said, I heard your disciple got into trouble and almost killed Miao Yen. I'm here to take a look. If she dies, we'll go our separate ways. There's no need for us to work together anymore. Having said that, he turned to Old Monster Su and asked, Ugly, can you cure her? Also, who is this kid? His voice was loud and clear, as if he didn't care about anyone. Old Monster Su was clearly afraid of Monk Huiyuan, so he merely smiled. I'm useless. I can't cure her, but, pausing for a moment, just as Monk Huiyuan was about to explode, he hurriedly said, This person can be cured. Monk Huiyuan let out a sigh of relief. Next time an ugly monster like you breathes so much, I'll slap you to death. It's good that she didn't die. If she really died, then we can only part ways. Unless you guys have the guts to go capture the Xian Dao sect's true celestial Miao Yen. Monk Huiyuan, calm down. Come, I'll tell you what happened. God Lord Gu interrupted and led Monk Huiyuan away so they could talk further away. Just then, Lin Jin opened his eyes slightly and glanced around, sighing inwardly. He had heard a lot of useful information earlier. Combining it with Lord Guy and Old Monster Su's conversation, Lin Jin had a relatively complete picture of the situation. Sir God Yin and the others were working together to do one thing. The key to this was to find a specific person to chant the Heaven Path mantra. Lin Jin had no idea what Heaven Path mantra was, but he could tell that even in this foreign land, there are only a handful of people who could chant Heaven Path mantra. From the looks of it, there were probably only two people who met the criteria. One was Huang Ying, and the other was Spiritual Master Miao Yen. Both of them must be immortals who possessed a unique dermic chant ability. Only those who possessed this ability could do it. However, God Lord Gu and the others had a mishap. God Lord Gu's disciple was too heavy-handed and injured Huang Ying, almost killing her. With Huang Ying dead, it seemed like no one else besides Spiritual Master Miao Yen could chant the Heaven Path mantra. That was why Huiyuan said that. Now, Lin Jin wanted to know what God Lord Gu and the others' goal was and what Heaven Path mantra was. Also, Lin Jin had secretly observed Huiyuan, or rather, the Buddha beads hanging around his neck. No matter how he looked at it, Those crystal-like Buddha beads were extremely similar to the Nine Suns crystal described in a museum of deadly beasts. This was what Lin Jin was most concerned about. With many thoughts in mind, Lin Jin adjusted his thoughts before continuing to mend Huang Ying's soul. Now that he knew these things, Lin Jin understood where he stood. In other words, Lin Jin had a bright future ahead of him by saving Huang Ying's soul. Hence, Lin Jin could have repaired Huang Ying's soul completely. But after mending 90% of her soul, he purposely stopped to stabilize it before getting up and pretending to be exhausted. Old monster Su glanced at Lin Jin with a complicated expression. He then carefully examined Huang Ying before finally mumbling to himself, I didn't think there would be such a method to repair one's soul. Although it's not completely repaired, it's already a remarkable feat. Having said that, he turned back to Lin Jin. His gaze was exactly the same as how a pervert would look at a young girl. Kid, what method did you use to repair her soul just now? Old monster Su approached. Lin Jin knew what the man was thinking, so he had already made up his mind. Unafraid of the man's fake threat, Lin Jin replied coldly, Of course it's a secret method to repair one's soul. I've exhausted myself today, so I need to rest. I can only continue the treatment tomorrow. Not only was he saying this to old monster Su, but he was also saying it to God Lord Gu, who was approaching. Lin Jin could tell that God Lord Gu was the true boss of this group. Old monster Su had snuck into this group with his medical skills. If he wasn't strong enough, his status would be low. Truth be told, even if Lin Jin were to fight old monster Su one-on-one, he was confident he could defeat the man. Even among immortals, they were trash. Old monster Su clearly wasn't going to give up. He was desperate to know the secret method to repair one's soul. This was too important to him. If he could learn this secret technique, even the most powerful immortal would have to be respectful to him in the future. At the thought of this, old monster Su couldn't help but feel a little restless. No matter what, he had to force this secret method out of him. But soon, old monster Su heard a light cough from God Lord Gu. Startled, old monster Su calmed down. God Lord Gu was warning him. This was normal. Huang Ying couldn't die yet, so Lin Jin had to stay alive because only this person could save Huang Ying. If Huang Ying died, they would either give up on their plan or risk their lives to capture Reverend Miao Yin. The problem was Reverend Miao Yin someone they could capture so easily? To put it bluntly, even if they mobilized all their forces, it was hard to say who would be the one to capture. Wouldn't Xiandao sect and Reverend Miao Yin be given to them for free? If that was the case, old monster Su wouldn't get involved. He would run as far away as he could. Hence, old monster Su couldn't force an answer now. Otherwise, God Lord Gu would be the first to punish him. After thinking it through, old monster Su grinned eerily and took a few steps back. He didn't say another word, but he was still glaring at Lin Jin maliciously. Chapter 652. Appraiser Lin is truly brilliant. Lord Godmeng praised, his attitude clearly much more polite than before. Then, as if sensing something, Lord Godmeng was taken aback and immediately said, Now isn't the time to talk. Appraiser Lin, please follow me. Let's talk somewhere else. Having said that, he waved his sleeve, stirring up a gust of black wind. This skill was much more advanced than the wind manipulation Lin Jin had ever seen. He took to the air and flew far away in an instant. Old monster Su also sensed something and hurriedly left. Monk Hui Yuan's Kasaya once again emitted flames as he flew out. I didn't expect Xiandao sect to react so quickly. It's not like we're kidnapping their disciple. Why are they so nervous? Hui Yuan knew that Lin Jin was kidnapped by God, Lord Guy from Xiandao sect. Beside him, old monster Su said, Master, you might not know this, but this Lin Jin is quite capable. I heard he was able to cure Xiandao sect's immortal Kirin. If I were Sage Miao Yin, I would do everything I could to save Lin Jin. There's such a thing? Hui Yuan was also shocked and immediately said, But doesn't this completely offend the Xiandao sect? It's impossible for Reverend Miao Yin to take things lying down. He Old Monster Su let out a strange laugh. Are you afraid of offending the Xiandao sect? This was considered a compliment. Sure enough, Monk Hui Yuan laughed out loud. Although Reverend Miao Yin is powerful, I'm not afraid of him. I, Monk Hui Yuan, have always been free and unrestrained. I can do whatever I want. I've offended many true immortals over the years, so one more Reverend Miao Yin doesn't matter. As expected of the Fire Source Grandmaster. I'm impressed. Old Monster Su praised him again. Not long after Old Monster Su and the Fire Source monk left, a stream of light flew over from where they had been. A human figure appeared within the light. It was the Xiandao sect's Miao Yin. His aura is still there. He should have left not long ago. At this moment, Taoist Miao Yan's brows were cold and solemn. In the next moment, he found a direction and immediately transformed into a ray of flowing light as he chased after the target. After a while, Monk Hui Yuan and Old Monster Su, who had flown far away, suddenly sensed something. Old Monster Su wasn't very capable, but Monk Hui Yuan immediately waved the sun and moon shovel in his hand, creating a ring of fire that struck in a certain direction. Almost at the same time, a dermic voice came from the other side. Freeze! Rumble! Layers of golden lines immediately appeared in the surroundings, like a spider web that covered the sky, instantly restricting the surrounding 100 feet. The Fire Origin Monk and Old Monster Su were bound by the faintly discernible golden lines and were frozen in the air, unable to move. Among them, Old Monster Su was not strong enough, so he was unable to move and could only worry. As for the Fire Source Monk, his cultivation was profound. He was only frozen for a moment before he used his powerful magic power to break free and regain his mobility. However, it was precisely at this moment that Reverend Miao Yin, who was hot on his heels, had already arrived. His speed was so fast that it caused one to gasp in amazement. In the eyes of the bystanders, Taoist Miao Yin had arrived almost instantaneously. At this moment, his clothes were fluttering, his hair was floating, and his entire body was shining with golden light. Miao Miao Yin. Old Monster Su was still unable to move. Although his medical skills were brilliant, and he was a rare medical immortal, he was only a pseudo-immortal after all. He was much weaker than Reverend Miao Yin, who was a perfected immortal. Therefore, the Fire Source Monk could break Reverend Miao Yin's boundary art, but Old Monster Su could not. Simply put, without the Fire Source Monk, Old Monster Su would not even be able to withstand a single move from Reverend Miao Yin. The Fire Source Monk's expression was solemn, and the flames on his kasaya burned even brighter. The strange thing was that the flames could not burn the Fire Source Monk. Or rather, the Fire Source Monk no longer had any reaction to the flames. It could be said that he was immune to them. Seeing the Fire Source Monk, Reverend Miao Yin was also stunned and surprised. You are relaying Fire Temple's Fire Source Monk, Reverend Miao Yin said. The Fire Source Monk laughed. It's rare that Reverend Miao Yin actually knows this old monk. Reverend Miao Yin's expression was solemn. Relaying Fire Temple was also an orthodox, immortal sect in the past. You, the Fire Source Monk, are also a perfected immortal of fire. Kidnapping people is a despicable act. Why do you have to commit such immoral acts? The Fire Source Monk was enraged when he heard that and cursed. T. What orthodox immortal sect? In the end, the temple still collapsed and the immortals died. Now, other than immortals like Reverend Miao Yin, who else still remembers the relaying Fire Temple? If not for that muddle-headed immortal emperor who wanted to control the heavenly Tao, he wouldn't have triggered a shocking catastrophe and been killed by the heavenly Tao. What did our relaying Fire Temple do wrong? From the abbot to the elders, which one of us didn't do good deeds and bear fruit? In the end, the entire temple was killed by that ferocious beast. Orthodox immortal sect? Tui. The Fire Source Monk was clearly angered, or perhaps his mental state was unstable to begin with. In his eyes, Reverend Miao Yan's righteous attitude with a blatant mockery and provocation. The moment he finished speaking, a ball of flames burst out around the Fire Source Monk. instantly rising more than 100 feet high. Then he waved the Dharma treasure in his hand and attacked Reverend Miao Yin with the raging flames. From the front, it looked like 100 feet wide sea of flames had opened the floodgates and was surging over. The flames were not ordinary flames, but the soul-burning fire condensed by a perfected immortal. If an ordinary false immortal were to come into contact with it, their soul would be burned to ashes immediately. It was one of Fire Source Monk's killing moves. Reverend Miao Yin was not afraid when he saw that. There are differences between perfected immortals as well. Regardless of others, Reverend Miao Yin was definitely an existence that stood at the peak of the perfected immortals. At that moment, he chanted softly, "Water wall, gushing spring." He raised his hand and pushed. It looked gentle, but almost instantly, his palms seemed to stir a lake. Layers of water walls surged out like a spring gushing out of thin air. It was a mystical sight. The next moment, water and fire collided. It was as if the heavens were falling and the earth was cracking. Ripples of water vapor surged into the sky and spread in all directions. Old Monster Sue's body was fixed in place, and he could not move. However, he was shrouded by a scorching hot water vapor, causing him to scream. Although he could not move, he could still speak. Moreover, Old Monster Sue's immortal cultivation was indeed very ordinary, and his physical body was not strong. At that moment, he could not move and could not use immortal techniques to protect his body, so he was actually scalded. Fortunately, he was a false immortal after all and would not be scalded to death. However, he still had to suffer. Moreover, Old Monster Sue's current appearance was extremely miserable, like a cooked crab. However, both Reverend Miao Yin and Monk Hua Source did not have time to care about Old Monster Sue. The two of them were focused on the battle. After all, they were both perfected immortals and could not be careless. Fire Buddha, Mountain Suppression. The two perfected immortals once again threw their techniques at each other. Huge flames surged, as if 100 feet tall Fire Buddha stood proudly between heaven and earth. However, at the same time, Monk Hua Source's body seemed to be suppressed by a mountain. His entire body was pressed dozens of feet into the ground, and he could no longer be seen. Chapter 653. Old Monster Sue Cursed. Just now, half of his clothes had been burned, and he was in an extremely sorry state. Fortunately, the collision of spells and his own struggle had loosened the golden net that was holding him in place. In the end, Old Monster Sue bit the tip of his tongue and spat out a mouthful of blood. Old Monster Sue was a celestial doctor, and his blood was celestial blood. Celestial blood contained Dharma power and strong medicinal properties. Hence, the mouthful of blood finally broke the golden net. In such a situation, Old Monster Sue had to fight with his life on the line. The giant flame Buddha was just beside him. If he didn't escape, he would be roasted. Even so, Old Monster Sue was seriously injured, but he didn't dare to say anything. After breaking free, he immediately used his escape technique to escape. He only regretted not cultivating 4 legs. It wasn't that he was in a panic. Old Monster Sue knew that Hui Yuan was a perfected immortal fire-cultivated true immortal level 1. Although he was slightly weaker than perfected Miao Yin, he could definitely buy some time. Now, Old Monster Sue had every reason to suspect that this was God Lord Ma's scheme. God Lord Ma had found Hui Yuan. He probably wanted to use Hui Yuan to buy perfected Miao Yin. After all, perfected Miao Yin was too strong. Even if God Lord Ma took action personally, he might not have much chance of winning. Moreover, God Lord Ma had a huge scheme. Old Monster Sue knew a little about it. Hence, he had to escape if he could. He definitely couldn't fight with his life on the line. Moreover, he couldn't win. Old Monster Sue pondered for a while. He couldn't leave. He had to find God Lord Ma. His scheme was huge, and he had to get involved. Even if he couldn't get anything in the end, it would be worth it. As for his injuries, Old Monster Sue was a celestial doctor. Hence, it wasn't difficult for him to heal them. Old Monster Sue hit on a big tree. He took out a dozen elixirs and swallowed them. Then, he didn't dare to stop and hurried on his way. At the same time, he looked back. He couldn't see where Hui Yuan and perfected Miao Yin were fighting. However, he could feel that the battle was still going on from the surrounding spiritual qi. True immortals are indeed terrifying, and Reverend Miao Yin lives up to his reputation. Impressive, impressive. Wait a minute. Old freak Su suddenly had a thought. What if the fire source monk isn't a match for Reverend Miao Yin? What if he's captured or killed? Then, old monster Su's expression changed. It's impossible that Sir God Guy didn't think of this possibility. This means that he was prepared to lose Monk Hui Yuan. This person is really ruthless. Old monster Su stopped. He hesitated. Indeed, Sir God Guy's plan was huge, and what he was after was incredible. However, that person was too cunning, and he would even resort to unscrupulous means. He had even abandoned an expert like Hui Yuan just like that. It would not be difficult for him to abandon Yi Futian in the future, and he probably would not hesitate at all. No, Sir God Yin cannot be trusted. Old monster Su didn't want to go back, but he also didn't want to lose that fat piece of meat. After thinking about it, he sneered. I'm not strong enough alone, but I can rope in others. You, Sir God Yin, aren't the only immortal experts in this outworld. Old monster Su felt that he had found the right path. To be honest, even when he faced Sir God Meng alone, he still felt terrified. Sir God Meng was not only powerful, but he was also cruel and merciless. Although old monster Su was his accomplice, if it was necessary, Sir God Meng would not show any mercy. Fortunately, old monster Su believed that he was not a pushover. Just the fact that Sir God Meng had escaped without taking him with him made old monster Su very unhappy. At this, old monster Su quickly fled in another direction. At the same time, in an extremely secretive cave abode, Lin Jin sat on a stone bench. Opposite him was Sir God Yin. There was immortal tea on the table. An immortal slave had just served it to Lin Jin respectfully before retreating. Lin Jin noticed that the immortal slaves were real immortals. However, in this cave abode, they behaved like slaves, bowing down and acting cautiously. Based on this, Sir God Yin was different. Moreover, among these immortal slaves, there was no lack of beautiful female immortals. Appraiser Lin, if you like them, I can give you a few immortal slaves in the future. Sir God Yin had a smile on his face, but his words were shocking. Lin Jin was startled to hear it. It was as if Sir God Yin was talking about immortal slaves as tools that could be given away as gifts. Lin Jin realized that Sir God Yin didn't seem to be putting on an act. A true immortal who could give away an average hollow immortal as a gift was being so courteous to a mortal like Lin Jin. Moreover, he even abducted Lin Jin. Why? Lin Jin's curiosity was understandable. Lin Jin wasn't willing to be toyed with by an idiot. With Huang Ying's death as his bargaining chip, he steeled his resolve and put on a straight face as he asked, Sir God Yin, you're a true immortal, and I, Lin Jin, am just a mortal. You've abducted me here, and yet, you're putting on an act and treating me with such courtesy. Why are you here? Get straight to the point. Lin Jin didn't think it was because he wanted to save Huang Ying. After all, Sir God Yin might not have known that Lin Jin could save Huang Ying. If he did, he wouldn't have sought out old monster Su. Lin Jin's display of his cards didn't faze Sir God Yin at all. Perhaps Lin Jin would have reacted the same way. After all, the difference in cultivation and strength between them was too great. Sir God Yin took a sip of tea before saying, I've used soul transfer to control my unshackled doppelganger to travel across Middle-earth for 100 years. I've gained quite a bit of understanding of Middle-earth's customs and current situation. Of course, I've heard of your name, Appraiser Lin. Lin Jin was flabbergasted. This Sir God Yin could use unshackled doppelganger to leave the realm? That was impossible. Even if it was unshackled doppelganger, it had the aura of an immortal, so it couldn't possibly deceive a rank 9 immortal devouring beast. Unless there was some other secret technique. Right, when Sir God Yin mentioned soul transfer, he must be borrowing this secret technique. Moreover, his clone couldn't have reached the level of pseudo-immortal. Otherwise, the immortal devouring beast would have killed him the moment he showed himself. If that was the case, it wouldn't be strange if Sir God Yin knew about Lin Jin. It wasn't that Lin Jin was boasting, but his name was quite well known in Middle-earth. Not only did this Sir God Yin know of his name, but he also seemed to have a request. I've heard of your master as well. He's said to be the #1 beast appraiser, unparalleled in this world. Sir God Yin actually knew of Curator too, but that was to be expected since Curator's name was also well known in Middle-earth. Lin Jin didn't say a word. Sir God Yin hadn't gotten to the point yet. Sure enough, Sir God Yin said, I've invited appraiser Lin here to seek treatment for one of my disciples. Chapter 654. Lin Jin assumed that he would be meeting the disciple Lord Yin had mentioned. But in the end, Lin Jin was brought into a spacious cave. God Guy left a message for Lin Jin to rest here before leaving. It was obvious that the other party had urgent matters to attend to. Then, Lin Jin waited for an entire day to pass before realizing that he was being held captive. Throughout the day, Lin Jin had several immortal slaves serving him. But the problem was, Lord Man treated them as immortal slaves while Lin Jin couldn't. To Lin Jin, these immortals were still real immortals. Lin Jin was even sure that Lord Man had arranged for these immortal slaves to keep an eye on him. Although he was imprisoned, there were actually quite a few good things in this cave. All sorts of cultivation manuals were in the study, and Lin Jin could pick them up at will. There were no restrictions, so Lin Jin could read them whenever he wanted. These immortal manuals had their own merits compared to the ones in Xindao sect. Other than that, there were all sorts of pills here. They were all immortal pills, and their grades were not low either. Interestingly, these things did not put up any defenses against him. Lin Jin could use them as he pleased. There was even a huge alchemy furnace. Apart from not being able to leave, this was really a good place. That Sir God Kai was really generous. In this place, all kinds of spiritual herbs and materials could be found. After learning this, Lin Jin went all out. He rummaged through the materials and used Lord Yan's items to refine a few blaze pills for Xiaohua. This thing was beneficial to Fiery. In the future, once he found the 9-yang crystal and combined it with the blazing flame pill, Fiery Flame Pill would immediately allow Fiery to advance to the 6th rank. Of course, the key was still the 9 Suns crystal. Judging by the time, tonight was the opening day of the visitation hall again. However, there were immortal slaves serving him at all times, so there was almost no private space. After giving it some thought, Lin Jin decided not to hide it anymore. Since Lord Godguy already knew about the curator's existence and even knew quite a bit about it, he might as well show off his strength at the right time. Lin Jin guessed that God Lord Cover's polite attitude toward him was mostly due to the curator. In that case, Lin Jin decided to use the visitation hall to put him in his place. Although Lin Jin's display of strength was only a paper tiger, this was a battle of strategy and stratagems. There was no need to hide anything when it was time to reveal something special. This was also a form of protection for Lin Jin. But before that, he still had to refine the intense flame pill. There were enough materials here, as well as a magic treasure level pill furnace. It would be a waste to leave them here, so why not use them? Once Lin Jin thought things through, there were many things that no longer mattered. No matter what, Lin Jin had a last resort, and that was to hide in the visitation hall. Hence, there is no need for him to be afraid of Lord God Cover. Xiaohua's evolution method included the recipe for the scorching flame pill, but the pill's rank was rather high. After all, it was meant for a rank 6 mental pet beast, so it was equivalent to a rank 1 immortal pill. Even if Lin Jin knew everything, he wasn't an immortal. No matter how careful he was, he still failed on his first attempt. Had it been any other time, Lin Jin would have felt the pinch from losing so many materials. But this time, he wasn't using his own materials, so without hesitation, he started a second batch. As expected, due to the difficulty of refining the Inferno pill, Lin Jin's second attempt ended in failure. After giving it some thought, Lin Jin summarized his experience and realized that he had handled the entire process perfectly. He had even considered some of the details, but he still failed. The reason for this was because of one's realm. An immortal pill. If one wasn't an immortal, how could one refine an immortal pill? Perhaps there was some truth to this. Given enough time, Lin Jin might be able to come up with other solutions. But if there was a shortcut, why would he need to rack his brains? Lin Jin called his immortal slaves over. Due to Lord God Cover's orders, these immortal slaves treated Lin Jin with utmost respect, at least on the surface. If they were putting on an act, Lin Jin wouldn't mind playing along with them. Which one of you knows how to refine pills? Lin Jin asked. These were all immortals. As long as they knew how to refine pills and had Lin Jin's detailed recipe, they would definitely have a higher chance of producing the scorching flame pill than he did. If that was the case, why would Lin Jin bother himself? At the same time, he could see if these immortal slaves would really listen to him. Among the immortals, a female immortal stepped forward, indicating that she knew how to refine pills. Without hesitation, Lin Jin wrote down the scorching flame pill's recipe and handed it to her. The female immortal glanced through the recipe, but didn't think much of it. It's only a rank 2 immortal pill. I'll refine it now. Having said that, the female immortal bowed before walking to the furnace to start refining the pill. Lin Jin dismissed the other immortal slaves and told them to do whatever they needed to do. Then, he stood beside the furnace to observe. Admittedly, this immortal's pelletization skills were much more advanced than Lin Jin's. The female immortal's fair fingers formed a hand seal, and a few fire seals shot out. The inside of the pill furnace was already filled with raging flames. However, the female immortal made a hand seal and stuck the raging flames on the inside of the pill furnace. Then, she threw in all kinds of materials, and they were all wrapped in different kinds of immortal chi. She even bit her finger and dripped a few drops of immortal blood into the furnace. These weren't recorded in the recipe, so it was obvious that the female immortal had done this on her own. However, Lin Jin didn't stop her. Just based on her pelletization skills alone, the female immortal was a much higher-level alchemist than Lin Jin. An elementary school student shouldn't disturb a PhD student while he was doing his homework. In at most half an hour, the furnace glowed brightly and a fiery cloud appeared. Several scorching flame pills spouted out, and the female immortal reached out to pick them up as if she was plucking stars from the sky. She tossed them into a porcelain bottle before walking over to Lin Jin. The entire process was done in one go, as smooth as floating clouds and flowing water. Lin Jin was someone who had seen the world. His pelletization skills were probably one of a kind, even among immortals. Moreover, this female immortal had an outstanding appearance. There were many female immortals among the immortal slaves here. Although this female immortal wasn't the prettiest, she definitely ranked in the top 3. With her excellent pelletization skills, she must have an extraordinary background. However, the female immortal had no intention of talking about it. After handing the pills to Lin Jin, she left. Lin Jin wasn't in a position to ask too many questions. Moreover, it was already nighttime. Lin Jin put away the scorching flame pills, and in front of the immortal slaves, he opened the door to the visitation hall and stepped inside. There was obviously a restriction inside the cave, but fortunately, it couldn't stop the visitation hall from intruding. Lin Jin successfully entered the visitation hall and stood before the metal door. Lin Jin heaved a sigh of relief. Being able to enter the visitation hall was a good thing. This meant that no matter how dangerous the situation was, as long as Lin Jin had this trump card, he wouldn't be in dire straits. Chapter 655. Unbeknownst to Lin Jin, the moment he walked into the visitation hall and disappeared without a trace, the immortal slaves outside immediately panicked after recovering from their momentary shock. Where did he go? A door seemed to have appeared out of thin air just now. What should we do? Lord Gu told us to keep an eye on this man, but he suddenly disappeared. Lord Gu won't let him off easily. It's over. It's over. It's all over. Many of the immortal slaves were frightened to the point of losing their heads. Clearly, God Lord Mao was an existence akin to a mountain in their hearts, unshakable. It could be said that as long as it was something that God Lord Mao gave them, no matter how difficult it was, they would definitely complete it. This was a habit formed over the past thousands of years. There were a total of 32 immortal slaves here, and none of them dared to oppose Lord Gu. Even if they had the chance to escape in the past, none of them dared to do so. Because if they didn't succeed in escaping, they would be caught by Lord Gu. The consequences of the latter were too terrifying. None of them dared to take the risk. Lord Gu's order to keep an eye on this mortal seemed like a piece of cake to them, who knew something would go wrong in just one day. The immortals immediately ran over to search for him. However, even if they were immortals, they wouldn't be able to track down the visitation hall. The female immortal who refined pills for Lin Jin hadn't gone far. In fact, she had witnessed everything that happened. She was just as shocked. A strange glint even flashed across her eyes. "Xiang Yin, what should we do?" Another female immortal ran over and whispered, her face pale. The female immortal named Xiang Yin shook her head without saying a word. She didn't know what to say. She had no idea what to do. If that mortal named Lin Jin really escaped under the watchful eyes of immortal slaves like them, one could only imagine how Lord God Guy would punish them. There might be a few unlucky souls who would be directly killed or refined into something else. They might as well be killed right there and then. If Xiang Yin had to choose, she would choose to die a quick death. Come, let's go back first. Xiang Yin could be considered calm in times of trouble. Based on this alone, she was much stronger than the other hollow immortals. At the very least, her mental state was stable. Even under Sir Godgu's power, she could still maintain her composure. This was definitely rare and precious. But right at this moment, a mighty aura appeared. Xiang Yun's senses were very sensitive, and she immediately bowed in fear. The other immortal slaves also reacted one by one, and in an instant, they were all kneeling on the ground. The person who had suddenly appeared was Sir God Ao. Lord Man stood where Lin Jin had disappeared. Ignoring the immortal slaves around him, he wore a solemn expression. His eyes were glowing as he used some sort of spell to observe his surroundings with his spiritual eye. The other immortal slaves couldn't see it, but God Lord Yin could vaguely see a faint door that was gradually disappearing. "So it's here," Sir God Yin said. He immediately stretched out his hand and grabbed forward. His grab looked ordinary, but it carried dozens of divine skills that were attached to his fingers. In an instant, Sir Godgu's fingers pierced through barriers and broke through layers of the void. He wanted to push open the door that was about to disappear without a trace. At that moment, Sir Godgu used all of his true immortal level skills. He was confident that no matter what technique his opponent used, and no matter how well hidden the door was, he would be able to strike it and push it open. This confidence came from Sir Godgu's invincibility over the past 1,000 years, as well as his true immortal realm. And the truth was as such. The door that was about to disappear suddenly reappeared when Sir Godgu extended his hand. Almost at the same time, Sir Godgu slammed his hand on the door of the visitation hall. Bang! There was a loud bang. Lin Jin was startled. He glanced at the door at the end of the corridor. It was the door he had to open every time he entered the visitation hall. Usually, only he could touch it and push it open. But now, he heard someone banging on the door. Could it be Sir Godgu? Lin Jin was so frightened that he didn't dare to move. After all, he had never encountered something like this before. However, although a loud noise came from the door, it was not pushed open. The doors of the Museum of Deadly Beasts had a special restriction. Unless one had the visitation hall's wooden token or had the curator authorization like Lin Jin, no one else could enter. Lin Jin waited for a while. When he didn't hear a second knock, he relaxed. Still, a hint of anger rose within him. This Sir Godgu is too much. Lin Jin reached out and grabbed the real curator's mask before putting it on his head. Then, instead of opening the visitation hall's metal door, Lin Jin strode toward the end of the corridor, the door he used to enter the visitation hall. When he got close, Lin Jin reached out and pulled the door open. This was definitely an impulsive move on Lin Jin's part. Since Sir Godgu knew about the curator and had purposely set up this trap, he was most likely using Lin Jin as bait to lure the curator out. If that was the case, he might as well play along. If you want to meet him, let's meet him. At that moment, Lin Jin used the curator's mask's power to stabilize the door in case it suddenly disappeared and cut off this passage. On Sir Godgu's side, this true immortal expert had used his supernatural powers to open the door that was about to disappear. He even wanted to slap it open. However, the power of this door was clearly beyond Sir Godgu's expectations. Although the door was right in front of him, Sir Godgu knew his limits. He couldn't open it. Scoffing, Sir Godgu was visibly annoyed. He had come up with this idea on a whim to see if he could use Lin Jin to lure out the legendary curator, who knew he would be stumped by a door. He was a true immortal. To be stopped by a door, he would lose face. However, even though he was angry, Sir God Yushan's palm strike had received a huge backlash. He knew that if he could not push it open, he could not push it open. Even if he used his most powerful celestial technique to attack it, the door might not be damaged at all. Forget it. Sir Godgu turned to leave. But at that moment, the door creaked open from the inside. The voice came very suddenly. Sir Godgu was obviously a little surprised. He immediately turned his head and happened to meet the eyes of a masked man in the open door. The beast mask. This was the curator's trademark. Even with the mask on, Sir Godgu could feel the curator's anger. At that instant, Sir Godgu's heart skipped a beat as fear welled up within him. Chapter 656. Not only did Sir Godyin see it, but the other immortal slaves also saw it clearly. Just now, Sir Godyin had suddenly appeared and used a great divine skill to open an invisible door with one palm. They could clearly feel the loud noise and tremors. At that moment, the immortal slaves were shocked. At the same time, they had a thought. If there was someone inside the door, he would definitely be unhappy. No one liked to have their door smashed. But soon, the door opened, revealing the figure inside. Although the person was wearing a mask, they could feel his anger and unhappiness. An immortal's 5 senses were far more sensitive than immortals. This was naturally a good thing, but at the same time, they could feel more things. For example, aura and murderous aura, angering a rabbit and angering a tiger. When faced with these two things separately, the feeling would definitely be different. Now, including Sir Godyin, all the immortal slaves felt the same. So much so that after they glanced at the masked person, they did not dare to look at him a second time. They all lowered their heads and bowed, using this posture and attitude to express their subservience. Of course, Sir Godyin would not do this. He was an overlord with perfected immortal cultivation. His strength was so strong that even if he faced an expert of the same level, he would have an advantage. But at this moment, he did feel a real threat. From the door came an aura that made him shudder. That was the heavenly Wei Qi. In addition to the oppressive feeling brought by the mask, Sir Godyin could not help but cup his hands in greeting. I guess you must be. Before he could finish, the door closed with a bang. It was like a salesman with a smile on his face had met a bad-tempered customer when he came to the door and was slammed in the face. The sound of the door closing was very loud. The moment the door closed, it slowly dissipated. But this time, Sir Godyin did not dare to use his divine skill to make the door appear again. It was not that Sir Godyin did not want to, but that he did not dare to. He did not dare to take this risk. There were many auras that came from the door just now. Some were like primordial beasts, some were like true immortal overlords. But the most terrifying thing was that there was a trace of heavenly Tao Qi mixed in with these auras. The Qi of the Way of Heaven was very rare. Sometimes, even if it was revealed, people who were not knowledgeable would not be able to detect it at all. Only people like Sir Godguy, who had experienced the great trial of the immortal path 2,000 years ago, and whose cultivation had reached the level of genuine immortal, could distinguish it. It was said that the immortal devouring beast that had devoured countless immortals had this aura. Just based on this, Sir Godyin was afraid. Although he thought that only others would be afraid of an existence like him, he would never be afraid of anyone. But he was afraid. Sir Godguy admitted this in his heart. Besides, if it was a celestial, only those who had reached the carefree celestial realm could use a little bit of the Qi of the Way of Heaven. This seemed to coincide with the amount of heavenly Dao Qi from before. With so many coincidences put together, even if he didn't believe it, he had to think in one direction, and that was that the person in the door, just now, was most likely a free and unfettered immortal. Thinking of this, Sir Godguy's heart couldn't help but twitch. The free and unfettered immortals had been extinct for more than 2,000 years. During the great trial of the immortal path, because the free and unfettered immortals had the Qi of the Way of Heaven, they were the first immortals to be counterattacked by the Qi of the Way of Heaven. It could be said that in the blink of an eye, the free and unfettered immortals were struck by the lightning of the Way of Heaven and died completely. Sir Godguy saw with his own eyes that a tyrannical free and unfettered immortal was struck to death by the lightning of the Way of Heaven and disappeared instantly. From that moment on, the free and unfettered immortals were extinct. Sir Godguy knew very well that if anyone could achieve the carefree celestial realm, they would definitely be able to stand at the peak of all immortals, and they might even become the new celestial emperor. This was also what he had been looking forward to and longing for. But now, he realized that the free and unfettered immortals in this world didn't seem to be extinct. The person in the door, just now, was most likely a free and unfettered immortal. No, not most likely. He must be. At that moment, Sir Godguy had completely come back to his senses. His eyes were filled with envy, anxiousness, and a tinge of jealousy as he started walking around. It seemed that this was the only way he could start thinking about the problem, what to do next and what to do next. Black water! Sir Godguy called out, and a person ran in quickly from outside. If Lin Jin was here, he would recognize the person who came in from outside. It was the leader of Liangzhou's water god cult, Black Water Taoist. However, the current Black Water Taoist looked very different from when he was in Liangzhou. The current Black Water Taoist had an eerie, ghostly aura around him. The source of the ghostly aura wasn't Black Water Taoist himself, but a claw glove made of metal that he was wearing. This was the Ghost Claw. It was a treasure refined by a powerful demon lord thousands of years ago. It had extraordinary power and was reforged by Sir Godguy before being given to Black Water Taoist. Now, Black Water Taoist had acknowledged Sir Godguy as his master and became his disciple. However, those who were familiar with Sir Godguy would know that there was only one disciple in Sir Godguy's eyes. The others were just dogs that he used. Black Water Taoist might be aware of this, but he was still willing to follow Sir Godguy. He could obtain so much by following Sir Godguy that he was willing to be a dog. Moreover, what was so bad about being a dog? Master, I'm here. Black Water Taoist went up and bowed. After following Sir Godguy for some time, he knew his master's temperament very well. In front of God, Lord Man, one definitely had to remember the words respect and not get carried away. Taoist Blackwater had once heard from a few of his senior brothers that one of Taoist Blackwater's disciples was very conceited and arrogant. It was actually somewhat disrespectful. In the end, in less than 2 days, God Lord Man casually found a reason to kill him. Moreover, it was done in front of other disciples. It was as good as killing a chicken to warn the monkeys. From then on, as long as one was Sir Godguy's disciple, they would never forget to be respectful. You said you've seen the curator? There was a tinge of coldness in Lord Godguy's voice. Taoist Blackwater had a bad feeling in his heart, but he still answered respectfully, Master, the water god sect in Liangzhou of the central mainland was destroyed by the curator. I met him at that time. Then, does his mask look like this? Does his figure look like this? Sir Godguy raised a finger and used a spell to conjure the appearance of the person behind the door. Black Water Taoist looked up and said, That's right. It's him. He's the curator. Blackwater, what did you say about the curator's cultivation level? Sir Godguy asked again. Black Water Taoist didn't know the situation, but he could only bite the bullet and say, The curator's name is very famous in Central Mainland. He should be the #1 expert in Central Mainland. His strength shouldn't be underestimated. However, I think that no matter how powerful the curator is, he can't compare to the many immortals in the outer region. He can't even compare to Master. Bastard, Sir Godguy scolded. Blackwater Taoist was so frightened that he knelt on the ground and kowtowed. He was terrified and didn't know what he had done to make his master unhappy. Sir Godguy suppressed his murderous intent and said word by word, "Let me tell you, the curator is a true, unfettered immortal. Now tell me everything you know about him in Central Mainland. If you leave out even the slightest bit, I'll kill you." Chapter 657. While Blackwater Taoist was trembling in fear, he recounted everything he knew, including how the curator had used his supernatural powers to annihilate Water God cult. Meanwhile, Lin Jean pushed open the visitation hall's metal door. Lin Jean didn't close the door earlier. Instead, he couldn't maintain the strength to open it anymore. Sensing Lord Yan's true immortal strength, he developed a self-defense mechanism. These were all Lin Jin's guesses. He had no idea what actually happened. But no matter what, the moment the door opened, Lin Jin could feel a surge of energy coming from the museum. Lord Guy was clearly frightened by what he saw. Lin Jin had finally vented his anger. However, Lin Jin knew that this was far from enough. He knew that he had been too impulsive earlier, but since he had already done it, there was no point in complaining. Lin Jin's main purpose for the visitation hall's opening was to inform Chun Xiankong, so he could inform Reverend Miao Yan. However, the moment Lin Jin stepped into the hall, he saw the grim expressions on the visitors' faces. The next instant, Chun Xiankong bowed and said, "Curator, Appraiser Lin has been kidnapped. Our Xiandao sect has mobilized everyone to investigate, but there's still no news. We hope that you can save him, Curator." Lin Jin was stunned. Chun Xiankong was here to ask for his help? Come to think of it, this seemed to make sense. After all, the man didn't know that Lin Jin was the curator, and the curator was Lin Jin. If Lin Jin was in Chun Xuankong's shoes, he would have notified the curator immediately. Chun Xiankong looked genuinely anxious. Lin Jin could also tell that he had been on the move for the past few days and was covered in dust. Based on Chun Xuankong's behavior, Lin Jin could tell that Xiandao sect was indeed gathering the entire sect's resources to search for Lin Jin. Lin Jin nodded. "Chun Xiankong, don't panic. Get up and talk." Clearly, Lin Jin was currently behaving in an extremely composed manner. "Curator sure is confident," Chun Xiankong mused, impressed. The other visitors in the visitation hall had also heard about what happened from Chun Xiankong. They all looked anxious, but to be honest, most of them couldn't help. After all, this was beyond their capabilities. Even existences like Madame Ghostchild, Black Crow, and Yi Yujo were helpless. After all, the incident happened in a foreign land. It would be difficult for them to even go to a place like this, let alone help. Qin Yunshang suddenly said, "Curator, my master has led the disciples of the Cloud Path sect to the Xiandao sect. They're preparing to combine the forces of both sects to save Appraiser Lin. Only Qin Yunshang and her sect could help in this matter." After giving it some thought, Lin Jin realized that he still didn't know enough about Lord Man-Man. As the saying went, "Know thyself, know thy enemy." Hence, he couldn't be bothered to think about anything else. He simply asked Qin Yunshang and Chun Xiankong if they had heard of Lord Man-Man. The two of them were shocked when they heard this. It wasn't because of this piece of news. Instead, he was shocked that the curator knew of God Yin. Didn't this mean that the curator knew that Appraiser Lin was kidnapped by God Yin and the others? This news was rather well informed. After all, even the Xiandao sect's Taoist Miao Yin only learned of this recently. It was then that the curator realized how impressive the curator was. "Since you know of Lord Man-Man, you must know quite a lot." "I've only heard a little about this Lord Man-Man from the sect master," Chun Xiankong said. Chun Xiankong began explaining, while Qin Yunshang added a few more details. With this, Lin Jin gained a certain understanding of this true, immortal Lord Man-Man. The man had already made a name for himself when the immortal path was at its peak. He was a true immortal expert. Lord Man-Man had a sect too. But before the great immortal path disaster, he betrayed his sect for some reason and became an itinerant immortal expert. That sect obviously couldn't tolerate this, so they sent other immortals to get rid of him. In the end, all of them were killed by Sir Godman. In the end, the celestial cultivation sect even showed signs of decline because of Sir Godman. This was the first time something like this had happened to an immortal sect. Because of this, Lord Man provoked many immortal experts who wanted to join forces to kill him. However, the Great Immortal Path disaster saved Lord Man's life. More than 90% of the immortals were killed, and from then on, the Immortal Path declined. A small number of immortals could only hide in foreign lands to linger on their last breaths. After that, Lord Man went into hiding for a period of time. Then, he suddenly reappeared and destroyed many smaller immortal sections. Unfortunately, true immortals were now the pinnacle of existence. The other immortal sects didn't have the energy or ability to hunt down Lord Man. As time went by, Lord Man's forces gradually grew, and he managed to win over many experts and itinerant immortals. His strength wasn't much weaker than some of the immortal sections. Legend has it that Lord Man has an eccentric personality, and his tastes are different from others. He took in a monster as his disciple long ago, but who knew they would have a dual cultivation relationship, Chen Xiankong said. Qin Yunshang blushed when she heard this. This was clearly a sensitive topic. Lin Jin understood now. To put it bluntly, it was just bestial love. It wasn't a big deal. After all, Lin Jin knew very well that the appearance of some monster cultivators in human form was indeed eye-catching. Others aside, Lin Jin's own disciple, Shang'er, was a top-notch beauty. However, Lin Jin wasn't as despicable as Lord God, Yin, who had designs on his disciple. Just based on this point alone, he and Sir God, Yin, had different paths and could not work together. Lin Jin also thought of something else. Sir God, Yin had said that the reason why he had captured him was to treat the illness of one of his disciples. From the looks of it, there was an 80% to 90% chance that she was Lord God Yan's lover. It was no wonder that he was so anxious. Now his doubts had been resolved. Chen Xiankong continued. I also heard that Divine Lord Yu values that disciple very much. You could even say that he dotes on her. At this, Chen Xiankong had a strange expression on his face. Lin Jin, on the other hand, didn't find it strange at all. Indeed, some people had a fetish for demonesses. If they met someone who was especially to their liking, they would obviously dote on them. It was hard to say who was right or wrong. However, when Chen Xiankong said the next sentence, Lin Jin almost vomited. A true immortal expert actually likes a monster. It's one thing to like a monster, but a male monster at that. Disgusting. Chen Xiankong looked disdainful. Lin Jin felt as if he had been struck by lightning. In an instant, the image of Shang'er in his mind turned into that of a white ape. It was unimaginable. No, Lin Jin didn't even dare to think about it. His stomach spun, and he almost vomited. Fortunately, Lin Jin managed to suppress it. He was now acting as the curator, so he couldn't vomit no matter what. Chapter 658. The gossip between God Lord Yin and his beloved male, Demon, disgusted the visitors. This was considered an interlude in the visitation hall. Soon, everyone's attention shifted back to how to save Appraiser Lin. Listening to them discussing how to save himself, Lin Jin found it odd. Now, it seemed like he couldn't count on anyone, including Xin Dao's sect and Yin Dao's sect. Although they were immortal sects located outside the city, they had no idea where God Lord Yin was hiding. The problem was, Lin Jin didn't know either, so he couldn't describe it. Besides, Chen Xiankong, Qin Yunshang, and many other visitors had pinned their hopes on Lin Jin, the curator. They were counting on curator to save Appraiser Lin. Could Lin Jin say no? With this, Lin Jin realized that he could only rely on himself for the time being. Of course, Lin Jin could choose to stay in the visitation hall forever. But on second thought, even if he did leave, God Lord Yin might not dare to do anything to him. God Lord Yin would never forget the shock of curator opening the door. Moreover, Lin Jin had learned quite a bit about God Lord Yin's background. He also knew that God Lord Yin needed Lin Jin's help to save Huang Ying and her lover. Hence, no matter how he looked at it, Lin Jin had a trump card up his sleeve. Regardless of whether it was real or not, Lin Jin shouldn't be afraid of God Lord Yin. With this thought in mind, Lin Jin came up with a plan. This trip to the Outer Realm was meant to be filled with danger, and it could even be considered as taking chestnuts out of fire. If one was afraid of danger at every turn and wanted everything to be fine, yet still wanted to obtain sufficient benefits, then there wasn't such a good thing in this world. However, the ones who could truly pose a threat were Xian Dao sect and Yun Dao sect. Hence, Lin Jin told Chen Xiankong and Qin Yinshang to inform their respective sects to continue the search. Both of them nodded. In short, you don't have to worry about Lin Jin for the time being. I've already used a supernatural spell to project myself to warn God Lord Yin. He won't dare to harm Lin Jin. However, if you want to save him, you'll have to talk to Reverend Miao Yin and the others. Lin Jin's words implied that he had already warned God Lord Yushan. In addition, they were too far away, so he couldn't save them. He could save them, but he couldn't save them. He had to rely on the Xian Dao sect and the Yun Dao sect. His words were well said, reasonable and well-founded, and he did not let down his prestige. Since Lin Jin had said what he needed to say, there was no point in staying in the visitation hall any longer. After saying that, he turned to leave. However, Lin Jin didn't leave the visitation hall immediately. Instead, he paced back and forth in the corridor. Lin Jin needed to think about what he should do next. Although Lin Jin was sure that even if he took off his mask and walked out, God Lord Shan wouldn't dare to do anything to him. But even Lin Jin didn't know when this balance would be broken. Besides, what should they do next? Lin Jin couldn't possibly waste time on Godman. However, he wanted to know what Godman's plan was. Before this, Lin Jin had asked Chen Xiankong and Qin Yunshang if they knew about heavenly incantation. Lin Jin was disappointed. Both Chen Xiankong and Qin Yunshang had no idea what heavenly incantation was. However, they had memorized it. They could ask their sect master about it when they returned. However, Lin Jin didn't have much hope for this. Even if Chen Xiankong and Qin Yunshang managed to find out something, they would have to wait 7 days before they could report back. While 7 days wasn't a long time, too many things could happen. In the corridor, Lin Jin leaned against the wall, deep in thought. After a moment, Lin Jin made up his mind. He took off his mask, tidied up his clothes, and walked to the end of the corridor to open the door. The unique characteristic of the visitation hall was that wherever one entered, one would exit from the same place. Lin Jin was now inside the cave. There were 2 immortal slaves tidying up the place. When Lin Jin suddenly walked out of a door that appeared out of thin air, the 2 immortal slaves were startled. "Who is it?" "It's Mr. Lin." Upon seeing Lin Jin, the 2 immortal slaves immediately went over to greet him. Clearly, the rules set by Godman Man hadn't changed. Or rather, after Lin Jin left, Godman Man strengthened the rules. Here, Godman Man was the ruler with the highest status. He was the emperor who controlled everything. Meanwhile, Lin Jin was a guest. The immortal slaves had to monitor him and at the same time show him respect. No immortal slave dared to disobey Godman Man's orders. Lin Jin recognized one of the 2 immortal slaves. It was the female immortal Xiang Yun who helped him with pelletization. She was currently standing across from him, her body bowed and her head lowered. Lin Jin had a good impression of this female immortal because she helped him with the blaze pill. After what happened before, Lin Jin's mentality had changed. These immortal slaves were obviously fearful of Godman Man, and they weren't completely willing to submit to him. After confirming this with Chen Xiankong and the others, Lin Jin was tempted. Poaching. Having served Godman Man for so long, these immortal slaves must know a lot of secrets. Even if they didn't, these immortals' cultivation and capabilities were worth recruiting. That female immortal, Xiang Yun, was far superior to Lin Jin in pelletization. If Lin Jin could rope her in, having a pelletization expert by his side would be of great help to Lin Jin in helping Xiaohua evolve in the future. Now that he had the blaze pill, he only needed to get his hands on 9 Suns crystals to help Xiaohua evolve to rank 6. However, rank 6 wasn't the end. Lin Jin still wanted to promote Xiaohua to rank 7, rank 8, and finally to the peak of rank 9. Only then would he be able to go up against immortal devouring beasts. Frankly speaking, Lin Jin couldn't do this on his own. Even with the Museum of Deadly Beasts, it would still be difficult. But if he had a pelletization expert by his side, things would be much better. Once this thought arose, Lin Jin couldn't hold it in anymore. However, how to recruit these immortal slaves was a problem. Lin Jin hadn't figured it out yet, but he had to treat them with courtesy. Hence, Lin Jin returned the courtesy and asked, "Where is God-Man-Man?" The two female immortals were cleaning up the cave. Although they had tidied up nicely, Lin Jin could still tell that the place had been damaged. Needless to say, God-Man-Man was most likely the culprit in a fit of rage. From the looks of it, God-Man-Man could be angered too. This was a good thing. Be it immortal or an immortal, as long as they were enraged, they would reveal their flaws. Upon hearing Lin Jin's question, the two female immortals quickly answered, "God-Man-Man is meeting with a friend up ahead." Also, God-Man-Man said that if Mr. Lin returns, please wait for him. He'll be here soon. Chapter 659. It was another female immortal who spoke. She spoke quickly but clearly. Lin Jin nodded and thanked her. Then, he glanced at the female immortal Xiang Yun who had her head lowered. After some thought, he took out a prescription and handed it to her. "Since you're a pelletization expert, you shouldn't bury your talents. I have a prescription here, but I don't understand some of the refinement methods. Please help me take a look." Having said that, without waiting for her to agree, Lin Jin forcefully handed the prescription over before striding forward. It was impressive that God Lord Yin predicted Lin Jin's return. But if Lin Jin had to wait obediently, he wouldn't do so. At times like this, Lin Jin needed to display a domineering attitude that befitted someone with a trump card. As he walked forward, he passed through the pavilions, rock gardens, and ponds in the cave. Along the way, immortal slaves tried to stop him, but Lin Jin scolded them. Lin Jin was certain that God Lord Yin had specifically instructed these immortal slaves not to offend or be rude, so he had nothing to fear. He was basically forcing his way through. When he reached a large hall up ahead, Lin Jin was stopped by two immortal slaves with extremely high cultivation. Although they didn't resort to violence, they used various spells to stop Lin Jin. Indeed, Lin Jin wouldn't be able to get past them. However, Lin Jin was determined to cause a ruckus to test God Lord Yan's current attitude. Hence, he drew his sword. Sword energy surged. Lin Jin didn't know any advanced swordsmanship, nor did he spend any time practicing it. But this wasn't a problem. The breezy monster sword was capable of unleashing immense power on its own. The two hollow immortals in front of him wore grim expressions. Lin Jin was immortal, but the sword he wielded was a proper immortal sword. The sharp sword energy was enough to hurt them. Since he wanted to cause trouble, Lin Jin swung his sword at them. The sword energy was like a beam of white light that swept across. The two hollow immortals immediately dodged. Although it didn't hit them, it managed to cut down a bunch of stone pillars and lion statues. It was quite a scene to behold. However, Lin Jin's sword energy didn't dissipate. Instead, it continued moving forward as if it was going to cut the hall apart. Just then, a person leaped out and extended his arm. In an instant, a black aura coalesced into a giant, ghostly hand that blocked the sword energy. Lin Jin took a closer look at the man and found him rather familiar. Soon, Lin Jin remembered. Blackwater Cultivator. He's actually here? Lin Jin was genuinely shocked. Back in Liangzhou, when they annihilated the entire water god cult, this Blackwater man was the only one who went missing. Lin Jin had thought of many possible destinations for this man, but he never expected him to come to an extraterrestrial land. What's more, he was with Lord Masquerade. Other than that, this Blackwater man had obviously gained a lot of opportunities as well. That eerie black metal claw he was wielding was a powerful artifact. Just now, he was able to easily block the sword chi. One must know that even the two immortal slaves could not do it. After crushing the blade energy, Blackwater Taoist glared at Lin Jin with a dark expression, his eyes filled with hostility. However, as if remembering something, Blackwater suppressed his hostility and took a step forward. "You're Lin Jin? My master has instructed me that if you return, please wait outside for a moment. He will immediately come out to meet you after he finishes dealing with some important matters." Blackwater Taoist didn't make this up. Lord Masquerade had indeed instructed him to do so Blackwater Taoist dared not spout nonsense. Also, he was feeling guilty, because Lord Masquerade had personally said that the curator who annihilated his water god sect was a carefree immortal. How could Blackwater Taoist not know what kind of existence a carefree immortal was? Even his master, Lord Masquerade, was no match for a carefree immortal. After learning about this, Blackwater Taoist was shocked and afraid, but also relieved. Fortunately, he was smart enough to escape in Liangzhou. Otherwise, the grass on his grave would have grown out by now. However, Blackwater Taoist was puzzled. If it was a carefree immortal, logically speaking, he shouldn't have been able to escape. Taoist Blackwater didn't understand this matter, but God Monarch Mask's words shouldn't be wrong. Taoist Blackwater was extremely respectful towards his new master. He didn't dare to resist at all. Moreover, Taoist Blackwater believed God Monarch Mask's words without a doubt. Although Lord Masquerade didn't say it explicitly, Blackwater Taoist was nothing. If Lin Jin was truly a carefree immortal's disciple, even Lord Masquerade couldn't afford to offend him, let alone himself. There were still many things he couldn't figure out. For example, if Lin Jin had already left, why would he return? Also, why did his master, Lord Masquerade, think that Lin Jin would return? There must be something behind this. Blackwater Taoist couldn't figure it out, but he didn't dare to ask. Lord Masquerade wasn't a talkative person. He would tell you what he should tell you, but it wasn't right to ask what he shouldn't. In any case, Blackwater Taoist knew very well that he would not be able to avenge the destruction of the Water God sect. Even if the curator was just an immortal, or even a true immortal, Blackwater Taoist would not be able to reach a carefree immortal. If he really wanted to take revenge, Godlord Cover would probably be the first to kill him. Blackwater Taoist could only suppress his desire for revenge for the time being. There will be plenty of time. These were Blackwater Taoist's words to comfort himself. Therefore, after Taoist Blackwater said what his master told him, he didn't say anything else. Lin Jin could hear him clearly. He obviously wouldn't bother with Blackwater Taoist now. Blackwater Taoist was just a nobody, a dog raised by Lord Masquerade. Lin Jin was considering a choice. Should he wait here quietly, or should he just barge in? How could a person with the carefree immortal behind him wait here obediently, especially when they're already showing signs of falling out? Lin Jin quickly analyzed the situation and the mentality of both parties. If he really waited here obediently, something might happen instead. Since that was the case, he might as well take a gamble. A plan gradually formed in Lin Jin's mind, including Lord Masquerade's thoughts. Lin Jin had a rough idea of what he was thinking. He didn't know if he was right, but at least there were signs and possibilities. After thinking it through, Lin Jin made up his mind. Having made up his mind, Lin Jin took a deep breath and strode toward the hall. Wait, don't even think about it. What are you doing? Stop right there. Blackwater Taoist was stunned to see Lin Jin approaching before he shouted. But Lin Jin ignored him and continued forward. Stand down. Blackwater Taoist was enraged. His ghostly hand once again emitted eerie aura that rose into the air. Lin Jin could clearly hear the ghostly wails and howls. Lin Jin reached out to hold the breezy monster sword's hilt. Truth be told, Lin Jin and Blackwater Taoist were somewhat similar. Neither of them had immortal cultivation and relied on the artifacts they wielded. From the looks of it, both of them were equally matched. If they were to fight, it would depend on whose artifact was stronger. That ghostly hand didn't look weak, but Lin Jin trusted the breezy monster's sword more. Chapter 660. Lin Jin chose to make the first move. He had fought Taoist Blackwater once before. Back then, Lin Jin had completely annihilated Water God Cult. Taoist Blackwater was so frightened that he had to flee. That was a great victory to his heart's content. However, it was undeniable that if Lin Jin hadn't used his artifact or pet beast, he wouldn't have been Blackwater's match with his own cultivation and strength. This time, Blackwater was clearly an upgraded existence. Not only did he cultivate some incredible skill, but he had also obtained the Ghost Claw artifact. Lin Jin was a knowledgeable man. He could tell that the black claw in He Shui's hand was horrifying in appearance and unique in texture. There was a thick, ghostly aura around it, as well as a hint of demonic nature. It was definitely a powerful artifact with a powerful background. However, since Lin Jin wanted to display his toughness and dominance as unfettered immortal disciple, he had to defeat Blackwater with an absolute advantage. Only then would it make sense. Only then would he not arouse Lord Cover's suspicion. Since Lin Jin had a plan in mind, he would execute it accordingly. Sensing Lin Jin's will, the breezy monster sword immediately released rays of sword light. At first, it was slow, but then it suddenly sped up and slashed at Blackwater. Taoist Blackwater was enraged. He mused, how dare Lin Jin attack? Isn't he afraid? On second thought, another idea popped into Blackwater's mind. Since Lin Jin was unfettered immortal's disciple and had such a powerful backer, of course he wouldn't be afraid. Perhaps Lin Jin wouldn't attack Lord Cover directly, but he wouldn't hold back against Blackwater. That was more appropriate. However, Blackwater wasn't a pushover. He was ambitious and had his own plans. Although he now knew that Lin Jin had unfettered immortal's backing, he couldn't just let Lin Jin get beaten up. Blackwater immediately activated Ghost Claw, and a ghostly image appeared on his body. Vaguely, a gigantic black shadow appeared behind him. It was like a demon that had crawled out of hell. It was obvious that Taoist He Shui was still a little fearful, or even fearful. Therefore, he went all out without holding anything back. At present, he could only unleash around 60% of the Ghostly Claw's power. But even if he couldn't unleash its full power, it was more than enough to deal with ordinary immortals. The colorful sword Qi instantly slashed at the black Qi in front of him. Blackwater Taoist waved his ghostly claw, and a sky-splitting claw mark appeared in the air, blocking all the sword Qi. However, Lin Jin didn't stop and continued to activate Breezy Monster Sword. Cosmos Blade. Lin Jin activated Breezy Monster Sword with all his might, squeezing out all the combat power it could muster. There was a blinding flash of light before Lin Jin's eyes. In the next instant, the blade energy had traveled 1,000 feet, and Lin Jin was now several hundred feet behind Blackwater Taoist. One more step, and he would be inside the hall. On the other hand, Taoist Blackwater revealed a shocked expression. His right hand drooped down, and one could faintly see blood dripping down from his ghostly claw. The originally tall and terrifying demon statue behind him had also disappeared without a trace. That attack happened so quickly that the victor was decided in an instant. The result showed that Lin Jin had the upper hand. With the unstoppable sword energy, Lin Jin pierced through Blackwater's demonic statue and even injured his arm. Of course, Lin Jin's original plan was to chop off Blackwater Taoist's right arm. That way, he would be able to cripple this potential threat. Lin Jin believed that even if he crippled Blackwater Taoist, even if God Masquerade was angry, he wouldn't take any other form of revenge. At the very least, before he figured out Lin Jin's background, God Mask wouldn't act recklessly. This was God Mask's personality. After asking around, Lin Jin had basically figured this out. Hence, he acted fearlessly, because the more he acted, the more certain God Meng would be of his conjecture. As long as God Meng wasn't hot-headed and wanted to fight to the death with this carefree, immortal curator, Lin Jin wouldn't fall out with him. No matter how overboard Lin Jin was, God Mask would tolerate it. Lin Jin didn't look at Blackwater anymore. Although Ghost Claw had protected Blackwater's right arm, that attack just now wasn't something that could be resolved in a short period of time. Blackwater wouldn't be able to use his right arm for the time being, which meant that he would be crippled for the time being. Without turning back, Lin Jin strode into the hall. Behind him, Blackwater's expression was contorted as if he was about to go insane. Back in Liangzhou, Curator had destroyed his water god order, and Blackwater had fled like a stray dog. Now, he had suffered a crushing defeat against Curator's disciple. Now, all he felt was a burning pain in his right arm, and he couldn't move at all. This was a great humiliation. Blackwater couldn't take this lying down. But now, he had no choice but to swallow it. This indignation and anger almost drove him insane. Fortunately, he still retained a shred of rationality. I haven't lost yet. Blackwater Taoist clenched his teeth and swallowed the blood in his throat, then moved forward. He wanted to cultivate. He wanted to improve. He wanted to take revenge. Curator was a carefree immortal, and Blackwater knew he couldn't afford to offend him, at least not for the time being. But what about Lin Jin? Just like him, Lin Jin was a mere mortal who wasn't even an immortal. Lin Jin was only flaunting his might with the artifact given to him by his elders. Blackwater had lost this time. But next time, Blackwater would defeat Lin Jin once and for all to redeem himself. Wait and see. All of you just wait and see. Blackwater mumbled to himself at a volume that only he could hear. As for Lin Jin, he knew that Blackwater would definitely think of ways to take revenge. However, Lin Jin didn't think much of Blackwater. What kind of future did a man who only flaunted his might with his artifact have? Moreover, Lin Jin clearly saw that while Blackwater's demonic hand was powerful, the side effects weren't small either. Blackwater had been corroded by the ghost energy, and he didn't even realize it. How pathetic. That was all. Lin Jin obviously wouldn't lower himself to a tool's level. By now, he had stepped into the main hall. There were no immortal slaves inside. This was clearly God Mask's private place where most people weren't allowed to enter. Perhaps even Blackwater could only stand guard at the door and wasn't allowed to enter. But Lin Jin didn't hesitate. He strode forward as if he was entering his own home. Just as he stepped into the main hall, Lin Jin felt a wave of scorching heat wash over him. Chapter 661. There was a difference of at least 10 degrees between the temperature inside the hall and the outside. Perhaps even higher. As if he had entered a sauna, Lin Jin's curiosity was piqued. After taking 2 more steps, he saw the entrance to the Cosmos Realm. However, the Cosmos Realm seemed to be riddled with cracks, as if it had been rammed by some powerful force. It looked like a large piece of shattered crystal material that stretched for more than 100 feet. One shouldn't underestimate it. If one were to step inside, they would be able to expand the space by 100 times. This was a magical technique used by many experts. However, under normal circumstances, the Cosmos Realm was very stable. Even if one were to walk in from the outside, they wouldn't notice it at all. They would only feel as if the place had suddenly opened up. What was supposed to be a small house could now be a vast field. The situation before them could only mean that a fight had broken out in the secret realm of Qiankuan. The scorching aura was also seeping out from the cracks in the universe secret realm. Isn't Godlord Cover supposed to be receiving guests? Lin Jin frowned, confused by the situation. He felt that it was best not to step into the Cosmos Realm, because if he did, he might get involved in a storm that had nothing to do with him. But at that moment, Lin Jin's attention was caught by the waves of heat that seeped out. Lin Jin specialized in fire cultivation. His first pet beast, Xiaohua, was a fire wolf. Besides that, Lin Jin cultivated dragon fire, so he was very familiar with the aura of fire. The aura of fire that seeped out from the Cosmos Realm was familiar. This made Lin Jin's heart skip a beat as he seemed to have thought of something. Without hesitation, he dashed into the Universe Realm. This Cosmos Realm was clearly sealed off by someone using mana. However, due to a huge impact, a crack appeared and the aura seeped out, allowing Lin Jin to enter. The moment Lin Jin stepped into the Arcane Realm, his surroundings changed instantly. He was supposed to be inside a hall, but now it was a sea of fire. Whether it was heaven or earth, all they could see were blazing flames, surging magma, and raging, scorching winds. It was a world that was completely engulfed by flames. The temperature here was naturally higher. If a mortal without the protection of a magical artifact or a pet beast formed a blood contract were to come in here, they would die in a few breaths' time. It's more like an oven. Thanks to Xiaohua, Lin Jin was highly immune to fire and heat. But even so, the flames here still made Lin Jin uncomfortable. It could only be said that perseverance was still possible. Fortunately, Lin Jin still had the 4C's Freedom Gourd. With a pat on the gourd, a warm mist enveloped his body, driving away some of the scorching heat. The next instant, Lin Jin saw two people fighting in front of him. One of them was Sir God Ao. The other one, who was at a disadvantage and seemed to be heavily injured, was Hui Yuan, whom Lin Jin had met before. Weren't the two of them together? Why were they fighting? Internal strife? It wasn't an act. At this moment, Hui Yuan and God Lord Hyde were fighting to the death. They didn't hold back at all. God Lord Yin was fine. Only his sleeves and eyebrows had been scorched by the flames, but there were no other injuries. However, half of Monk Hui Yuan's body was dripping with blood. If one looked closely, one could see that there were a few strange insects on Monk Hui Yuan's right arm. They were like octopuses that were attached to it and were nibbling away at Monk Hui Yuan's flesh. Clearly, Monk Hui Yuan had used all sorts of methods, but he was unable to get those few weird bugs down. Every time, he would be stopped by God Lord Guy. Sir God Ao, why are you doing this to me? Hui Yuan bellowed as flames rose from his body. But strangely enough, as soon as the flames spread to the strange insects, they were devoured. Not only was Hui Yuan furious, but he was also terrified. There was nothing he could do. Sir God Ao didn't say a word. He was the type of ruthless person who would only attack without speaking. Why did he attack Hui Yuan? Since he had started, it was obvious that this wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. He must have planned this beforehand and was targeting Hui Yuan's weaknesses. For example, those strange insects. Although their skin looked soft, they possessed supernatural powers that allowed them to withstand the flames. At that moment, Sir God Ao noticed that an outsider had intruded into his cosmic realm. He frowned at first, but when he turned to see that it was Lin Jin, an inexplicable fear crept into his expression. He immediately turned to look behind Lin Jin. That faintly discernible door seemed to have been behind Lin Jin all along. Upon noticing this, Sir God Ao's eyes revealed a hint of fear. It was just that Sir God Ao had made ample preparations to scheme against Hui Yuan. He had considered all possibilities so that nothing would go wrong. But now, Lin Jin had barged in and even brought that door with him. This made Sir God Ao's heart skip a beat. Meanwhile, Hui Yuan finally noticed Lin Jin's presence. A glint flashed across his eyes, and he immediately cast a spell to pounce at Lin Jin. Sir God Ao was about to make a move when he thought of something and stopped himself. If Hui Yuan attacks, will Curator intervene? But no matter who dies, it seems to be beneficial to me. Sir God Ao mumbled to himself, planning to watch from the sidelines. Lin Jin was startled as well. He didn't expect Hui Yuan to suddenly charge at him. Just as Lin Jin was about to retaliate, he heard Hui Yuan's voice transmission. "Young friend, don't be afraid. I'll get you out of here." With a moment of hesitation, Monk Hui Yuan was already in front of him. He instantly cast a Vajra transformation spell, and his body became 3 times bigger. He stretched out his hand, and threw the shovel of sun and moon in his hand. The treasure flew out and exploded. The huge impact directly shattered the Qian Kuan mystery realm. Even the matrix that God Lord Yin had set up to prevent him from leaving was destroyed. With that, Hui Yuan broke free and rushed out of the hall with Lin Jin in tow. Sir God Ao was shocked. Things had clearly gone out of his control. He didn't expect Hui Yuan to still have some strength left. He even went as far as to detonate the artifact to break the formation. "This is bad." Sir God Ao immediately gave chase. However, Hui Yuan was also a true immortal. Even if he was severely injured, who could stop him if he tried his best to escape? By the time God Lord Ao Shan flew out of the main hall, the cave abode outside was already filled with surging flames. Clearly, Fire Source Monk had set a fire before he left. At this moment, the cave abode was already in a mess. Immortal slaves were shouting everywhere. Some went to extinguish the fire, while others let out miserable cries as their bodies were set ablaze. Chapter 662. Murderous intent surged on Lord Yan's face as he released his psyche to investigate, but to no avail. Hui Yuan was nowhere to be found. Not only had Hui Yuan escaped, but Lin Jin was gone as well. The current development was like a wild horse breaking free from its reins, completely out of control. Hui Yuan was a true immortal expert, after all. Although he was much weaker than Lord Yan, if he were to risk his life, no one could stop him. Many of the restrictive formations outside the cave abode had been broken by Hui Yuan. With immortal energy leaking out, Lord Yan didn't have the time to chase after Hui Yuan. He had to relocate the cave abode immediately because it had been exposed. It wouldn't be long before his enemies came knocking on his door. After Lord Yin expended a huge amount of mana to relocate the cave abode and repair the formation, he realized that he had suffered a huge loss this time. Not to mention the fact that many places in the cave were damaged and countless treasures were lost. There were also less than 20 of his 32 immortal slaves left. They were either dead or missing. It was fine if they were dead, but it was hard to say if they were missing. They had most likely escaped. These immortal slaves were the ones Lord Yin used to annihilate small immortal sects or capture other itinerant immortals, enslaving them with spells. To put it bluntly, these immortal slaves appeared to be respectful and fearful of him on the surface, but in reality, they probably wanted nothing more than to skin him alive and devour his flesh. However, compared to Hui Yuan and Lin Jin, the disappearance of a few immortal slaves wasn't even worth mentioning. At the same time, somewhere in the outer realm, Hui Yuan could no longer maintain his escape skill. His gigantic diamond body had reverted to its original size, and the two people he had brought with him tumbled to the ground. One of them was Lin Jin, and the other was the female immortal Xiang Yun whom they took with them after they rushed out of the hall. That alchemy expert. It was Lin Jin's idea to bring her away. Since there was a chance to bring such a talented alchemist away, he couldn't leave her with Lord Yin. Most importantly, Lin Jin had a use for her. Xiang Yun knew that she had left that terrifying cave abode, and a glimmer of hope flashed across her eyes. However, she was still staring at Lin Jin and Hui Yuan fearfully. At this moment, Hui Yuan's situation was not looking good. The strange insects on his body were still gnawing away at his flesh. Lin Jin had noticed that it wasn't that serious earlier, but now, one of Hui Yuan's arms was gone. It was gone. As for those strange bugs, he still couldn't get rid of them. Clearly, Hui Yuan had tried his best, but to no avail. Forget it. Maybe it's because I've done too much evil in the past few years and abandoned my Buddhist nature. That's why I ended up like this. As the saying goes, evil deeds bear evil consequences. I admit it. At this moment, the fire source monk was sitting on the ground weakly, leaning against a boulder. The flames on his body were also slowly weakening. It could be seen that he was about to die. Lin Jin couldn't see it too clearly, but Xiang Yun had a clearer view of the situation. After all, she was a pseudo-immortal. Her eyesight and sensitivity to immortal energy were several times better than Lin Jin's. In her eyes, Fire Source's immortal foundation had been damaged, and there was an aura of death surging around him. This was a sign of immortality. You too, leave. Be smart next time, and don't get caught by that Lore Man again. That shameless bastard is ruthless. If you get caught again, only death awaits you. Hui Yuan coughed and spat out a mouthful of blood. The blood turned into a ball of raging flames that began burning fiercely. Lin Jin had a feeling that what this guy spat out was either lava or burning gasoline. This was ridiculous, right? This was a true immortal fire cultivating. Lin Jin suddenly came to a realization. He had read about true immortal fire cultivating in some of Xian Dao sect scriptures. Comparing those descriptions to Hui Yuan, it couldn't be any more accurate. Moreover, Lin Jin seemed to have heard about it from Lord Man, coupled with Lin Jin's own deduction. the possibility of true immortal fire cultivating increased significantly. But none of these were as direct as asking. Lin Jin simply asked, "Master, may I ask if you are a true immortal fire cultivating?" At this, Hui Yuan coughed and laughed. "I, Hui Yuan, am indeed a true immortal fire cultivating. However, I'm a true immortal fire cultivating who is about to die. I advise you two to run. If I die, the surrounding area will immediately become a land of fire. Once that happens, lava will rage and flames will rise to the sky. It'll be difficult to escape." This time, Hui Yuan personally admitted it. Lin Jin was thrilled. He had been searching for traces of a Nine Suns crystal, but to no avail. Only a true immortal fire cultivating could refine a Nine Suns crystal. Although he still hadn't found the crystal, he did find a living, true immortal fire cultivating. Wouldn't it be just a matter of time before he got his hands on the Nine Suns crystal? For this reason alone, Lin Jin couldn't let Hui Yuan die. Putting aside whether or not Monk Hui Yuan was a good or bad person, he was a true immortal Huolian, someone who could concoct out the 9 yang crystals. Additionally, he had also saved Chinfeng back then. That was something of a life-saving grace. Thus, helping Monk Hui Yuan out was only natural. Lin Jin reached out to touch the strange worms on Hui Yuan's body. These worms could reproduce and divide continuously. By now, half of Hui Yuan's body had been enveloped by them. Lin Jin could tell that Hui Yuan couldn't do anything to these worms, and he was in agony. "Don't move." The first to warn Lin Jin was the female immortal, Xiang Yin. When she saw that Lin Jin was about to touch the worms, she couldn't help but speak up. Clearly, she knew a thing or two about Lin Jin and had noticed something. Lin Jin's fingers paused as he looked at the female immortal in surprise. The latter hesitated for a moment before biting her lip and saying, "Mr. Lin, that's a spirit devourer ghost worm. It's something cultivated by God Guy's unique demonic art. Other than God Guy, who has a special method to control it, anyone else who comes into contact with it will never be able to get rid of it." Perhaps noticing Lin Jin's doubt, Xiang Yin added, "I once knew an immortal who died to God Guy's spirit devourer ghost worm. So, I know very well that these things can't be touched or touched." Hui Yuan said weakly, "Young friend, if you want to save me, forget it. Even I can't do anything to these worms. You'll only lose your life if you try. Go, hurry up and leave." Lin Jin understood. Instead of attacking, Lin Jin flicked out a silver needle with a flip of his hand and sent it straight at one of the worms. The speed of a needle was extremely fast, and it pierced the body of the strange insect. However, in that instant, the strange insect skin seemed to have been tempered 1,000 times, and it actually bounced off the needle, causing sparks to appear. Xiang Yun and Hui Yuan looked disappointed. They probably thought that the needle was one of Lin Jin's supernatural powers. Since it couldn't pierce the worm, it must have failed. But to Lin Jin, it didn't matter whether the needle pierced the worm or not. Since it was a strange worm, it belonged to the ranks of beasts. As long as it was a beast, the Museum of Deadly Beasts could identify it. Chapter 663. Spirit-devouring ghost worm was a rare rank 6 insect beast, refined using the 5 elemental arts. It had a body of extreme yin and was immune to fire. It enjoyed devouring immortal energy and loved to feast on immortal flesh. There were 3 evolution methods and 4 refinement methods. Lin Jin frowned when he saw the disgusting body of the strange worm floating in the air inside the museum. Admittedly, this area was extremely creepy. Too creepy. The spirit-devouring ghost bug was an extremely unique and rare species. In the Museum of Deadly Beasts, there were only a handful of ferocious beasts that could be described as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. In fact, it was the only one of its kind. Based on this fact alone, this creature was probably even rarer and more precious than the giant panda that Lin Jin was familiar with. Moreover, these spirit-devouring ghost worms were specially refined by Lord Guy Yin using spells. They were basically a special kind of artifact, a living artifact. Of course, they were rare. If anyone else encountered these things, even a powerful true immortal like Hui Yuan would have no way of dealing with them. They would be doomed. Similarly, if a mortal like Lin Jin were to get entangled by these spirit-devouring ghost worms, even if he relied on artifacts, he would end up worse than Hui Yuan, because Lin Jin didn't have enough immortal energy to be devoured. Without spirit energy, he would have to eat flesh and blood. If that happened, he would die for sure. Xiang Yin was aware of this too, so she spoke up to stop Lin Jin from touching it. She didn't want Lin Jin to seek his own death. However, both Hui Yuan and Xiang Yin didn't know one thing. Lin Jin had the Museum of Deadly Beasts. On the other hand, no matter how high or low a pet beast was, their strengths and weaknesses, the Museum of Deadly Beast appraisals were all transparent to Lin Jin. Based on the law of nature, the stronger something was, the more fatal its weakness. However, most people wouldn't know about this. This was Lin Jin's advantage. Even if he wasn't immortal, under special circumstances, he could unleash combat strength and skills that even a true immortal couldn't match up to. Just like now, Lin Jin studied the refinement method of this spirit-devouring ghost worm. Now that he was confident, he reached out to grab it again. Hui Yuan and female immortal Xiang Yun were stunned. It would have been understandable if the other party had acted rashly without knowing what was going on. However, Zhang Xian had already warned him, and yet the other party still insisted on courting death. That was a huge problem. No, what are you doing? Both of them spoke at the same time, but this time Lin Jin was steeled. Ignoring what they had to say, he reached out and grabbed a spirit devourer worm. This thing looked like a weird octopus leg or a fat earthworm full of lumps. In short, it didn't feel good in his hand. If Lin Jin had to describe this thing with one word, it would be disgusting. But it was like eating bubble gum. Once it was stuck, it couldn't be shaken off. Be careful, this thing can corrode your skin and flesh, and it will instantly fuse with your skin and flesh. It's impossible to peel it off. The fire source monk said anxiously, but when he said the last sentence, he suddenly realized something. This spirit devourer worm in Lin Jin's hand seemed to have come from his body. But before this, he had tried everything he could think of, but to no avail. Could it be that Lin Jin was just lucky? But Lin Jin didn't use any special skills. He just reached out to grab and pull. That was all. What was going on? Hui Yuan felt a little better after having one spirit devourer worm ripped off. But that was it. After all, there were more than 10 spirit devourer worms in his body now. Almost all of them had burrowed into his body, becoming one with his organs and veins. Under normal circumstances, it was impossible to peel them off. While Hui Yuan was still in shock, Lin Jin put the first ghost worm aside and reached out to grab a second one. This second one only managed to reveal its head before Lin Jin forcefully pulled it out from Hui Yuan's flesh. The scene was indescribable, but Hui Yuan felt strangely refreshed. When Lin Jin waved his hand after pulling the second spirit devourer worm out, Xiang Yun was dumbfounded. She couldn't imagine how Lin Jin did it. It looked so easy, so simple. It was as if he had just grabbed something from one place and placed it somewhere else. It was that simple. However, she knew very well that things weren't as simple as they seemed. She observed carefully. When the spirit devourer worm was in Lin Jin's hand, it didn't struggle at all. This was clearly different from the other spirit devourer worm she knew. This evil creature was fierce, so how could it be so docile? Under normal circumstances, it would definitely struggle and retaliate against its captor. But the reality was just as she saw it. The worm was docile. It felt very familiar, right? Xiang Yin remembered now. This was just like when God Lord Yin took the spirit devourer worm. Instead of resisting, it was very obedient. But how was this possible? Xiang Yun's mind was a mess. Meanwhile, Lin Jin had already taken out the third and fourth spirit devourer worms. It went smoothly, so smoothly that Lin Jin was surprised. The refining method provided by the Museum of Deadly Beasts was, in fact, very simple. It was like an extremely sturdy iron door. Without the key, it would be impossible to pass through. No matter how one rammed, chopped, or hacked, the result would be the same, even though it would create a huge commotion. However, if one had the key, things would be much easier. Lin Jin now had the key to controlling these spirit devourer worms. Following the Museum of Deadly Beasts refinement method, the moment he touched these spirit devourer worms, he channeled a special type of mana into their bodies. With that, the worms would immediately calm down. The museum's method proved to be effective. One by one, Lin Jin pulled out all the ghost worms from Hui Yuan's body. Some of the worms had already grown up to 3 feet long. Pulling them out of Hui Yuan's body was excruciating. Even with Lin Jin's mental endurance, he felt his hair stand on end as if there were worms crawling all over his body. When the last ghost worm was pulled out, Hui Yuan let out an extremely comfortable moan. At that moment, he was like a wild horse that had just escaped its reins, his aura rippling. His previous weakness and aura of death were gone too. Indeed, this was definitely a calamity of life and death for Hui Yuan. In fact, Hui Yuan was indeed on the verge of losing his life and falling into immortality just now. However, if one were to take away something that could save his life, it would be a piece of cake for a true immortal to preserve his life or even heal some of his injuries. Chapter 664. Flames slowly surged out of Hui Yuan's body and enveloped him. Lin Jin could feel the scorching heat. Although he wasn't afraid of fire, he still took a few steps back. Hui Yuan must be recovering from his injuries and recuperating right now. A few steps away, the female immortal, Xiang Yun, stared at Lin Jin as if she had just seen a ghost. She still couldn't figure out how Lin Jin managed to make the spirit devourer ghost worm behave so obediently after making contact with it. The insect wouldn't attack him. Xiang Yun wasn't dumb. On the contrary, she was incredibly smart. She had secretly studied the spirit devourer ghost worm before. It was a fierce and unique spirit worm with a tenacious vitality that wouldn't be corroded by water or fire. In other words, it was impossible to forcefully subdue it and make it obedient. There was only one possibility left. Lin Jin did exactly what Lord Man did to this spirit devourer ghost worm. But how did Lin Jin know about Lord Man's secret technique? After being captured and imprisoned by Lord Man for centuries, Xiang Yun understood the true immortal expert's temperament well. He wouldn't trust anyone, even his most capable subordinate. Even that male pet who was favored and doted on by Lord Man wouldn't know about this secret technique. Xiang Yun studied Lin Jin from head to toe, thinking, although this Mr. Lin isn't exactly handsome, his facial features are distinct. His skin is soft and supple, giving him a rather dashing air. His skin isn't bad, and his limbs are well proportioned. Could this be Lord Man's taste? Lin Jin obviously noticed this beautiful female immortal staring at him. Her large eyes had been staring right at him. Come to think of it, Lin Jin was quite knowledgeable, but this was his first time seeing such a direct and passionate gaze. Truth be told, he found it a little hard to take. The beauty of a fairy was obviously top-notch. Even a beauty like Shang'er paled in comparison. The only thing that was lacking was that celestial aura. Could this female immortal have taken a liking to me? Lin Jin was inwardly pleased. Any other man would be delighted to be stared at by such a beautiful fairy. After all, this was a reflection of his own charm. However, Lin Jin wasn't going to immerse himself in the affairs of men and women. He had higher aspirations. If this female immortal were to confess later, Lin Jin felt that he would have no choice but to reject her. But now, Lin Jin retracted his gaze. He wanted to continue refining these spirit-devouring ghost insects. Now that Hui Yuan was fine, the true immortal's recovery had nothing to do with Lin Jin. Besides, even if Lin Jin wanted to help, there was nothing he could do. He wasn't a doctor. Or rather, he wasn't a doctor who treated people. According to modern terminology, Lin Jin was a veterinarian. He was in charge of the ferocious beasts, but he couldn't be bothered with anything else. The spirit devourer ghost worm was a good thing. It was arguably the best pet beast Lin Jin had ever seen, second to none. Even Big Yellow's Golden Crow and Phoenix bloodlines, or even the Xin Dao Sex Qilin, were inferior to these little insects. Believe it or not, this was the truth. After refining them and controlling them with a secret technique, God Lord Gon could easily injure Hui Yuan, who was also at the true immortal realm. If Lin Jin hadn't accidentally stumbled into the spirit-devouring ghost insect, Hui Yuan might have died there and then. This wasn't an exaggeration. Just this point alone was enough to show how amazing the spirit-devourer ghost insects were. No other pet beast could reach this level of combat power. But similarly, the more powerful they were, the greater the drawbacks. In fact, the biggest problem with the spirit-devourer ghost insects was that they were too powerful. So powerful that the slightest carelessness could result in a backlash. Even the master who controlled them had to be careful. This was like using a double-edged sword. It could hurt others, but it could also hurt oneself. Lin Jin didn't know what method God Lord Gon used, but he was sure that no matter what method he used, it wasn't as brilliant or as perfect as Lin Jin's. After all, it was the Museum of Deadly Beasts that provided the refinement method. Earlier, Lin Jin had merely used his special spirit energy to paralyze the ghost insects. It was like grabbing a snake's weak spot, so these things wouldn't resist. However, if Lin Jin wanted to use them as his own weapon, a trump card that he could use to defeat his enemies by surprise, he would have to refine them further. Lin Jin touched his pocket with an awkward expression. To refine these ghost insects, he needed a furnace. He had a pellet furnace, a fire furnace, and quite a few of them. But the problem was, none of them met his requirements because what he needed was an immortal-grade pellet furnace. Hence, after some thought, Lin Jin turned to Xiang Yun and saluted her. "Dear Immortal, do you have an immortal-grade pellet furnace?" Lin Jin was only asking tentatively. Meanwhile, Xiang Yun, who was still staring at Lin Jin, trying to figure out the relationship between God Lord Gon and this man, suddenly came to a realization. She nodded. "I do." Having said that, she reached out with her fair fingers and plucked off an earring from her left earlobe. In the next instant, Xiang Yun blew on it gently and chanted a few incantations. That earring actually emitted a white mist with a fiery glow within. Soon, it became a pellet furnace that was as tall as two people. An immortal-grade pellet furnace. She really did have one. Lin Jin's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He mused, "This immortal sure has some background, and she's quite bold too." She actually showed this treasure out in the open, and not even God Lord Gon noticed it. Xiang Yun was smart enough to notice the confusion in Lin Jin's eyes, so she explained, "When it comes to concealment artifacts, my sect has some unique skills." In other words, she was an expert in concealment artifacts. It was indeed impressive. If this immortal hadn't mentioned it or taken it out, Lin Jin wouldn't have been able to tell that her earring was actually an artifact, an immortal-grade pellet furnace. However, Lin Jin was still feeling awkward. After all, to refine these star-devourer ghost insects, he needed to activate this immortal-grade pellet furnace. But he wasn't immortal. He couldn't activate it. He could only turn to Xiang Yun for help. The latter had no intention of turning him down, because she was curious about what Lin Jin was going to do next. Although both of them were human and immortal and hadn't known each other for a long time, it was strange that they seemed to have a tacit understanding of each other. According to some mystical sayings, they were indeed fated to meet. Otherwise, when Hui Yuan rushed out with Lin Jin, they wouldn't have coincidentally bumped into her. And if Lin Jin hadn't seen her and had the idea to ask Hui Yuan to bring her along, none of this would have happened. Lin Jin wanted a rope and a pellet expert for his own use, while Xiang Yun saw Lin Jin as her savior. However, for a moment, she had her suspicions that Mr. Lin and God Lord Gon had an unspeakable relationship. Chapter 665. Even now, she had this speculation. However, she was also doubtful. Since he had a relationship, why would he go against Lord God Gu? Could it be that love had turned into hatred? Had he fallen in love with someone else? Was he two-timing? All sorts of possibilities flooded Xiang Yun's mind. The more she thought about it, the more likely her speculations seemed. The more she thought about it, the more she felt that it was the case. Although she didn't discriminate against such things, she still felt awkward when it actually happened. However, with her personality, she wouldn't show it no matter how awkward she felt. Lin Jin, who was completely unaware of this, thought that his charm was boundless, and that he was currently teaching female immortal Xiang Yun some refining methods. Of course, Lin Jin didn't tell her everything about the refining method. He still had to hold back. The final step was similar to the blood contract method. Lin Jin had to do it himself. Otherwise, Lin Jin wouldn't be the one controlling the spirit devourer ghost worm. If he did that, not only would Lin Jin fail to gain control over the ghost worm, but Xiang Yun would also be in trouble. After all, she didn't know how to control it. If she were the one controlling it, she would immediately be devoured by the ghost worm. To Lin Jin, the spirit devourer ghost worm was definitely a nuclear weapon. Without sufficient knowledge and preparation, even if he had this weapon in his hands, it would still be a hot potato. Stop! Lin Jin took the opportunity to shout. He had been controlling the entire process, and Xiang Yun was now nothing more than a tool to him. At the final step of the ghost worm refinement, Lin Jin had to do it himself, even if the process was dangerous for him. Xiang Yun stopped immediately. She glanced at Lin Jin, probably noticing that Lin Jin was going to do the final step, so she couldn't help but remind him. With your cultivation level, no matter what you do, this step will be extremely dangerous. You might even lose your life. Lin Jin could tell that she was reminding him out of goodwill. However, he had made up his mind. This was an opportunity to master a third type of pet beast. The so-called refinement method was actually an immortal-grade blood contract method that Lin Jin followed the museum's instructions. Since it was a blood contract method, there was a possibility of failure. Not to mention, this was a third type of pet beast. Only a handful of people in Middle China would have the opportunity to try it, just like the princess of the Thousand Island Nation. However, she was only able to form a blood pact with 3 pet beasts because of her 3-egg blood pact. This was a special situation. Aside from this, there was probably no other legitimate way to form a blood pact with 3 pet beasts. In fact, Lin Jin was trying to pull a fast one this time. He used the immortal-grade cauldron to refine the spirit-swallowing ghost bug, which was actually a blood fusion technique. The key was the ghost blood beast, Lin Jin's second pet beast. The Museum of Deadly Beasts provided the refinement method to control the spirit-devouring ghost bug, but it required fresh blood. In other words, blood was the catalyst. This was a necessary step, but it was also the most dangerous step. Even if Lord Guy wanted to control the spirit-devourer ghost bug, he would have to do it with blood. It might even be similar to the method Lin Jin used. While this method could indeed control the spirit-devourer ghost bug, if it failed or there was a mistake in the spell, the user would suffer a backlash. And this backlash was impossible to defend against due to the blood source. But in fact, there was a loophole in this correspondence. It seemed strict, but if one used blood similar to the ghost blood beast to control the spirit-devourer ghost bug, the backlash could be ignored. To put it bluntly, it was like a miracle drug, one that had no side effects at all. This idea was Lin Jin's own, not from the Museum of Deadly Beasts. The museum only had the refinement method, and Lin Jin had to use his own blood. However, Lin Jin had no idea if this method would work. The blood clone he cultivated would come in handy now. As for Lin Jin himself, he would augment himself with Xiao Hua's strength so he could deceive the spirit devourer ghost bug. Probably. After all, this was an unprecedented blood pact. If it worked, Lin Jin would reap great benefits. He would be able to use the ghost blood beast and his clone to form a blood pact with his third pet beast. Because there wasn't just one spirit devourer ghost bug, it could also be considered one. Through the Museum of Deadly Beasts, Lin Jin learned that this type of ghost bug could actually fuse and split. In other words, it was a mutated species. When that happened, Lin Jin's strength would improve by leaps and bounds. After all, he would have an additional nuclear weapon in his possession. Just like God Yin, Lin Jin could even challenge those of a higher level through the spirit devourer ghost bug. For example, with his mortal strength, could he kill one or a few hollow immortals? Even a true immortal, if they weren't strong enough, or if they were careless, would fall at Lin Jin's hands. Just the thought of it was thrilling. However, if the blood pact failed, the outcome would be, nothing much actually. Because Lin Jin was using the Ghost Blood Beast clone to form a blood pact with the Spirit Devourer Ghost Bug. If the pact failed, the Spirit Devourer Ghost Bug would attack the clone. Both sides would most likely engage in a fierce battle. But no matter who won or lost, Lin Jin wouldn't suffer any damage. The Ghost Blood Beast clone could continue to use the blood of the main body to slowly recover. As for the Spirit Devourer Ghost Bug, even if it was severely injured, it wouldn't die. This was also the scariest thing about this ghost bug. To Lin Jin, this was a huge advantage. Hence, even though these ghost bugs looked horrifying and disgusting, they were still adorable in Lin Jin's eyes. Lin Jin glanced at Xiangyun. His ghostly blood clone was Lin Jin's biggest secret. Logically speaking, he wouldn't want to expose it to anyone. However, he couldn't maintain the immortal-grade pellet furnace on his own, so he could only let Xiangyun handle it. Hence, even if it was exposed, it wasn't that big of a deal. And so, Xiangyun watched as a strange blob of blood flowed out of Lin Jin's body and condensed beside him. Slowly, it coalesced into a human figure. This human figure began to change until it looked almost identical to Lin Jin. Be it his facial features, physique, clothes, or even his aura, it was exactly the same. Avatar. Immortal Xiangyun was shocked. Cloning was a high-level immortal spell that even she wasn't proficient in. Yet, Lin Jin was able to cast it so effortlessly. That's not right. This isn't a clone that I know of. Xiangyun immediately came to a realization. It could only be said that this doppelganger that was condensed from a ball of strange blood was very similar to an external incarnation, but was not a high-end immortal technique in the traditional sense. The clone stretched its limbs before walking up to the pellet furnace. Then it slit its wrist and let out a mouthful of blood, pouring it into the furnace. "Fairy, please stabilize the pellet furnace," Lin Jin said. Xiangyun immediately came to her senses because the inside of the pellet furnace had begun to shake violently. The tremors were getting more and more intense. Hence, she immediately invoked an immortal spell to stabilize the furnace. Although the pellet furnace was still shaking, it was stabilized so it wouldn't topple over or break. That was how Lin Jin was able to make this unprecedented gamble, a blood contract that would go down in the annals of beast appraisers' history. Chapter 666. Using something similar to a clone to refine the spirit devourer ghost insects? That's not a bad idea, but will it work? Although Xiangyun felt that this was a very clever idea, it was hard to say whether it would succeed or not. After all, she had never heard of anyone using a clone to refine other objects. As a pelletization expert, Xiangyun's experience and knowledge must be extensive. She was definitely more knowledgeable than Lin Jin. She immediately concluded that the refinement process was most likely going to fail. The spirit devourer ghost insect was clearly more dangerous than anyone could imagine. In order to refine and control it, one must have sufficient resources. In other words, one must have a high cultivation level. Xiangyun glanced at Lin Jin, then at the blood clone, and shook her head. Although she could sense a strong power from the blood clone that had reached the level of a pseudo-immortal, it wasn't enough. After all, a clone was just a clone. It couldn't be compared to the real body. Thus, Xiangyun thought for a moment and continued to kindly remind him, "Mr. Lin, although your avatar's aura is strong, it can't be compared to your original body. After all, any avatar only relies on magic to support it. If you use this kind of medium to refine it, it will be impossible for you to succeed. You should be afraid of being devoured, but the more you do so, the more likely it is that you will be devoured by the ghost insects. If that happens, it will be almost impossible for you to continue refining these ghost insects." Lin Jin looked at Xiangyun in surprise. Clearly, the other party was very observant and had guessed most of his intentions. However, she still didn't know much about him. At the same time, the commotion inside the furnace grew louder. Lin Jin could hear the terrifying cries of the ghost insects inside. Xiangyun stopped talking as she focused on stabilizing the furnace. I can't take it anymore. I can't take it anymore. After a while, Xiangyun's face was drenched in sweat. It was obvious that she was at her limit. Seeing this, Lin Jin knew he had to use his ultimate move. With a single thought, the Devil Blood Beast avatar, standing in front of the cauldron, opened the cauldron and dove in. This scene shocked Xiangyun so much that she was speechless. Did he give up because he knew he was going to fail? But that didn't mean he would destroy his own clone. Or could it be that the doppelganger had committed suicide? Xiangyun could not understand. But the strange thing was that after the avatar entered the cauldron, the shaking within the cauldron gradually weakened. It was as if the ghost bug inside had been pacified. This is getting weirder and weirder, Xiangyun muttered to herself. How could she not see that it was effective? It was even possible that the refinement was successful. However, she could not understand the principle behind it. That doppelganger had entered the pill furnace. Was it not afraid of being burned to death? Even if it wasn't afraid, what happened after that? Why did the agitated spirit-swallowing ghost bug calm down? He couldn't see it, nor could he understand it. She didn't understand, but Lin Jin did. After the furnace calmed down, Lin Jin was relieved. Because they were separated by the cauldron, Xiangyun couldn't see it. In fact, when her ghost blood beast avatar entered the cauldron, it immediately turned into an endless sea of blood, filling the cauldron and enveloping all the spirit-devouring ghost insects. This was Lin Jin's ultimate method of refining and controlling the spirit-devourer ghost insect. Assimilation. The ghost blood beast was a unique type of beast. It could transform into a sea of blood and take on a myriad of forms. Similarly, it could also be like a liquid that could contain and devour everything. The ghost blood beast had the ability to devour as well. Lin Jin was using this ability to make the two beasts devour and fuse together. In fact, inside the cauldron, the ghost blood beast had already refined and controlled the spirit-devouring ghost insect. But soon, the spirit-devouring ghost insect began to retaliate. This was inevitable. After all, in terms of rank and realm, the spirit-devourer ghost worm was above the ghost blood beast. This was also thanks to Lin Jin evolving the ghost blood beast to rank 6. If it had remained at rank 5, assimilating and controlling the spirit-devourer ghost worm would have been impossible. But now, everything was possible. The moment the backlash began, the ghost blood beast immediately collapsed. Had it been a human or an immortal at the pseudo-immortal realm, even if they didn't die from the spirit-devouring ghost insect's backlash, they would still be severely injured. However, the ghost blood beast was nearly immortal. Once it collapsed from the backlash, it would immediately reassemble its body and continue refining and controlling it. Following that, the spirit-devouring ghost insect would retaliate again. But no matter how many times it tried, the ghost blood beast wouldn't die. And with each refinement, the ghost blood beast blood contract would grow even closer. With time, a certain balance could be reached. Under this balance, the spirit-devouring ghost insect could no longer retaliate. At the same time, the ghost blood beast could control the spirit-devouring ghost insect at will. As the owner of the ghost blood beast's blood contract, Lin Jin naturally inherited this blood contract. In other words, Lin Jin didn't even have to experience the pain and danger of the backlash to successfully refine the spirit-devouring ghost insect into his own weapon. This was equivalent to Lin Jin's third pet beast. All of this happened inside the cauldron, and it was an incredibly brilliant and mysterious process. Any immortal, top-notch beast appraiser, or even that reincarnated Dowlord would give Lin Jin a thumbs up after witnessing this. After all, this operation was too brilliant. Unfortunately, there was only one audience for all of this, and that was Lin Jin himself. Even if Xiangyun was standing beside him, she wouldn't be able to see this. And even if she did, she wouldn't understand. Lin Jin couldn't hide the smile on his face. Just then, a blob of blood flowed out of the cauldron and coalesced into Lin Jin's likeness. This was Lin Jin's ghost blood beast clone. Similarly, the clone had fused with the spirit-devouring ghost insect. If needed, Lin Jin could command it at will without worrying about any backlash. Because the backlash would be directed at the ghost blood beast clone, and the ghost blood beast clone was immortal. This was why this cycle could be considered brilliant. With this, Lin Jin now had a powerful trump card in his hands. When the time came, he could even fight a true immortal head-on. Lin Jin was a true immortal. The benefits seemed great, but in reality, the drawbacks were just as great. The ghost blood beast, a pet beast with immense potential, could no longer level up. It was now at the peak of rank 6, barely reaching the threshold of rank 7. Lin Jin could rely on the spirit-devouring ghost insect to deal with immortals and even injure a true immortal. However, the ghost blood beast could no longer evolve into rank 7, rank 8, or even rank 9. There was no point in thinking about that. It was as good as cutting off its future. However, this was Lin Jin's choice, and it was also a trade-off. After all, he couldn't just keep everything to himself. Back when he was reading the Museum of Deadly Beasts Refinement Method, Lin Jin had already prepared himself for this. Fortunately, Lin Jin didn't just have one pet beast. He had Xiaohua. Xiaohua was currently rank 5, but with 9 Sun's crystals, he could immediately evolve to rank 6. Although it wasn't much, Xiaohua's future was limitless. In the end, Xiaohua might be the only one who could reach rank 9. This became Lin Jin's future hope. Chapter 667. You succeeded? Xiangyan couldn't help but ask curiously. Lin Jin nodded. You can say that. Xiangyan was both shocked and perplexed. However, Lin Jin didn't intend to explain the key details to her. After all, she only needed to know the result. Coincidentally, there was some movement from Hui Yuan's side. The flames that were swirling around him dissipated, and Hui Yuan opened his eyes. By then, the weakened and deathly aura on him had completely disappeared. Instead, the aura of a true immortal reverberated once more. However, Monk Hui Yuan's missing arm did not grow back. Xiangyan quickly bowed. After all, Hui Yuan was a famous fire-cultivating true immortal. Even if he had committed some atrocious deeds, his seniority was still there. Master Hui Yuan, you're a true immortal expert. Even if you want to mend your arm, it shouldn't be a difficult task. Xiangyan looked at Hui Yuan's missing arm in confusion. Indeed, when one reached the true immortal realm, one would be able to recover even if one's body was damaged, let alone losing an arm. This was especially true for a fire-cultivating true immortal like Hui Yuan. His entire body could be engulfed in flames. How could the flames be missing when they were reignited? On the other side, Hui Yuan smiled. I purposely lost an arm so that I would remember the consequences of this incident and remind myself of it. Xiangyan nodded in understanding, and a look of respect appeared on her face. Lin Jin shook his head helplessly, thinking that Hui Yuan was up to something like this. But then again, when he read wuxia novels, didn't the northern beggar Hong Qigong cut off his own finger to wake himself up? Hui Yuan could only say that this was an epiphany for Hui Yuan. And for immortals like him, the higher their cultivation, the more they would gain from that epiphany. I saw your pellet furnace and that protective spell. Are you a disciple of Northern Qi's alchemy school? Hui Yuan asked Xiangyan. Stunned, the latter nodded. Master Hui Yuan, you have a good eye. You still remember Northern Qi's alchemy school. There was a hint of sadness and nostalgia in his voice. Of course I remember. 500 years ago, it was considered a decent immortal sect even in this foreign land. Their alchemy skills were even more famous. It was said that the sect master of the alchemy school, Mr. Bei Qi, had inherited his alchemy skills from Patriarch Danhong. When Fire Source monks said this, Xiang Yun's eyes shone brightly. It was a kind of pride. However, 300 years ago, Mr. Northern Qi's whereabouts were unknown. The Northern Qi alchemy school declined and disappeared from the Jiangnan. Just as Hui Yuan said this, Xiang Yun suddenly said, Mr. Northern Qi's whereabouts were not unknown. He was harmed by immortal Lord Meng. The Northern Qi alchemy school was also destroyed by immortal Lord Meng. Most of the alchemy school's disciples died at the hands of this immortal thief. Only one person survived. As she spoke, Xiang Yun clenched her fists tightly and even gritted her teeth, and she emanated an extremely dense hatred. Hui Yuan and Lin Jin could tell that Xiang Yun was probably the only surviving disciple of Northern Qi's alchemy school. At that moment, Xiang Yun bowed at Lin Jin and Hui Yuan. I am Xiang Yun of Northern Qi. Thank you for saving my life. I can tell that both of you have a grudge against immortal Lord Meng. If you're willing to seek revenge, I'm willing to lend you my strength. The thought of seeking revenge against immortal Lord Meng had crossed Lin Jin's mind before. However, immortal Lord Meng had many tricks up his sleeves. When he fought Hui Yuan, he had used the spirit-devouring ghost insect. But who could say that was his only trump card? Hence, if one wasn't strong enough, seeking revenge against immortal Lord Meng would be suicide. Lin Jin didn't say this out loud, but Hui Yuan did. Revenge? Easier said than done. Hui Yuan shook his head. I've known that immortal Lord Meng for more than 1,000 years. This man's methods are flawless, and no matter what he does, he's always thorough. To achieve his goals, he's unscrupulous and ruthless. Of course, that's nothing compared to the last point. The last point is that immortal Lord Meng's cultivation level is extremely high, far higher than mine. As he spoke, Hui Yuan shook his head. This time, immortal Lord Meng left me and old monster Su alone. Soon, Xian Dao Sec's spiritual master Miao Yin arrived, and I had no choice but to fight him. It was then that I realized I'd fallen into immortal Lord Meng's trap. I had to resort to some tricks to escape. After all, spiritual master Miao Yin was too powerful, and I couldn't afford to offend him. But if I wanted to escape, he might not be able to stop me. After that, I went to look for immortal Lord Meng and made it clear to him that I wouldn't get involved in his affairs anymore. Who knew that immortal Lord Meng would suddenly plot against me? Now, it seems like this was all part of his plan. He wanted to deal with me for a long time. But why? I don't understand. Hui Yuan rubbed his bald head with a hint of doubt. However, Hui Yuan had poured a bucket of cold water on Xiang Yun's desire to seek revenge. Simply put, even if the three of them worked together, they weren't confident in defeating immortal Lord Meng. Or rather, it was impossible. It was because they understood him that they were so sure. In short, they wanted revenge too, but they couldn't defeat him. Xiang Yun of Northern Qi could tell that she had placed her last hope on Lin Jin. Perhaps before, she didn't have much hope for the mortal-level Lin Jin. But after seeing with her own eyes that Lin Jin had used a strange blood clone to refine the spirit-swallowing ghost bug, this contempt disappeared without a trace. Chapter 668. To others, 9 Suns crystals were incredibly rare, but to Hui Yuan, they were easily obtainable. At this moment, Monk Hui Yuan's magical treasure, which was the Sun-Moon portable spade, had self-destructed in order to break the formation. As for the string of firestone-like Buddhist beads that he wore around his neck, it was long gone. Later on, Lin Jin found out that Hui Yuan had sacrificed the prayer beads he had been nourishing for 300 years in order to cast the flare evasion. It was also because of this that when Lin Jin fought God Yin, he didn't have the Buddha beads to cast Luo evasion a second time, which was why he ended up in such a sorry state. If Lin Jin hadn't accidentally barged in and let Hui Yuan know that there was a loophole in the heaven and earth barrier outside, Hui Yuan might have died in God Yin's hands. That string of prayer beads was actually a 9 Suns crystal. Each bead was a 9 Suns crystal, and there were a total of 108 of them. When Lin Jin found out, he felt a pang of pain. In order to find a single 9 Suns crystal, he had traversed thousands of mountains and rivers. Who knew how many trials and tribulations he had to go through? He had even risked his life to enter an extraterrestrial territory. How difficult and arduous was that? And yet, Hui Yuan had used up 108 Nine Suns crystals just to cast the flare evasion. To Lin Jin, this was a complete waste. Of course, Lin Jin knew very well that Hui Yuan's heaven evasion was an incredible spell. Moreover, Hui Yuan was fleeing for his life. Compared to his life, 108 Nine Suns crystals were nothing. Lin Jin could have let these thoughts slide. But now that he had gotten to know Hui Yuan by chance, according to the monk, if he wanted 9 Suns crystals, he could get as many as he wanted. These words were not just empty words. Following that, Monk Hui Yuan really flipped through his robes, and a 9 Yang crystal appeared in his pocket. I condensed this bead some time ago. I want to make a bracelet out of it, but I forgot about it, as I was too busy. Lin Jin, if you need it, just take it. If it's not enough, we can head to my cave abode later, and I'll get you a few Buddha beads that I've used before. You can just break one of them off and use it. Hui Yuan looked generous. Lin Jin accepted the 9 Suns crystal excitedly. Lin Jin would only listen to the other empty promises, but this 9 Suns crystal was the real deal. One was enough. Northern Qi Xiangyan had already successfully refined the intense flame pill, and not just one. Now that he had the 9 Yang crystal, it was as easy as turning over his hand for Xiaohua to reach the 6th level. Lin Jin didn't want to wait a second longer. He wanted to evolve into Xiaohua immediately. Once he reached rank 6, Lin Jin would be able to check out the method to reach rank 7. It was like a maze with layers upon layers. Only by entering one layer could one see the next. Xiaohua, Lin Jin called out softly. Immediately, a ball of flame surged out from his shoulder and coalesced into the form of a fire wolf. It was Hui Yuan and Northern Qi's first time seeing Lin Jin's fire wolf as well. Although they could tell that the fire wolf wasn't strong, they were still amazed by the fact that Lin Jin was able to fuse a beast's body with his own. Xiaohua still looked the same. His entire body was covered in flame-like fur. Because they were both of the fire attribute, Monk Hui Yuan took a liking to this little wolf at first glance. This wolf cub is well raised. Lin Jin reached out to stroke Xiaohua's head before eagerly taking out the intense flame pill and the 9 Suns crystal to feed Xiaohua. This was the method Xiaohua learned from the Museum of Deadly Beasts. Now that Lin Jin had gathered all the materials, all that was left was to witness the evolution process. After swallowing the intense flame pill and the 9 Suns crystal, Xiaohua's body instantly burst into flames. Not only that, but Xiaohua's body began to grow in size. In the blink of an eye, he transformed into a giant wolf, and his fur turned into flames. Wow, he's breaking through. Being a true immortal fire cultivating, Monk Hui Yuan realized what was going on. After pondering for a moment, he chuckled and spat out a small green flame. With his sharp eyes, Lin Jin could tell that this was a special type of flame. It was similar to the earthly brilliance green flame he found underground in Maple City. Moreover, it was clearly of a higher grade. After all, this was taken out by a true immortal fire cultivating, so it must be extraordinary. This old monk likes fire cultivators the most. However, in this world, there aren't many fire cultivators left. It's even rarer to cultivate to this level. Since we've met, it's fate. This old monk will give you an opportunity. This ball of emerald flame is for you. Having said that, he flicked his wrist. That small green flame shot toward Xiaohua's body and was absorbed into him. Lin Jin quickly thanked him. He could tell that this was Monk Hui Yuan's help. That small ball of green flame must be something special. By fusing it with Xiaohua during his evolution, Xiaohua's grade would be greatly enhanced. His strength would definitely rise to the next level, and he might even be reborn, increasing his potential. With this, Xiaohua's path to rank 7, rank 8, or even rank 9 would be smoother. It's fine. It's nothing. Monkwood didn't claim credit because he wanted to return Lin Jin's favor. After all, Lin Jin was the one who saved his life. Looking at Xiaohua, the flames on his body were initially green and crimson, but now they were tinged with green. Xiaohua had fused many different fire sources, and he now had 3 types of flames. One was the earthly brilliance green flame, the second was the phoenix flame, and the third was the emeraldine flame. In addition to his original dragon fire, after evolving to rank 6, Xiaohua's combat strength would definitely be superior to his peers. In Lin Jin's opinion, fighting a pseudo-immortal wouldn't be a problem. As long as he didn't run into a true immortal, his chances of winning were much higher. Boom! The flames on Xiaohua's body surged and spread, burning many of the trees nearby. Even Lin Jin and the others had to take cover. Then, a fiery tribulation condensed above Xiaohua's head. In the next instant, a condensed fireball appeared out of thin air and blasted toward Xiaohua. This attack was enough to burn a pseudo-immortal to death. However, Xiaohua merely opened his mouth and swallowed the fireball. Then, the fireball vanished without a trace. Was this considered a tribulation? Through their blood contract, Lin Jin could clearly sense that Xiaohua's strength had increased by more than 10 times. No doubt, Xiaohua had evolved. A rank 6 firewolf. This was probably the first time since the birth of the firewolf species. While Lin Jin was overjoyed, he also knew that this was just the beginning. His strength had increased by leaps and bounds, right? However, if he were to go up against God Lord Guy, he still wouldn't stand chance. Even if Monk Hui Yuan and Northern Qi Xiangyun were added to the equation, it would still be the same. Not to mention, he might have to face a rank 9 immortal devouring beast in the future. Hence, it was still the same saying. Don't be complacent. Keep up the good work. There was quite a commotion here just now, and I'm also afraid of attracting some people with ulterior motives. Having said that, the fire source monk transformed back into his diamond form and left with Lin Jin and Northern Qi. Hui Yuan's diamond form was incredibly fast, much faster than Lin Jin's cloud. Hence, Lin Jin was able to hitch a ride without any worries. Moreover, Hui Yuan was running on land and not ascending. This way, he was much less of a target and no one would notice him. The scenery in front of him flashed by quickly. Dense forests, rocky lands, swamps, snowy mountains. That's right, there were actually snowy mountains in the foreign lands. And this was where Hui Yuan's hidden cave abode was located. Hui Yuan put them down. Lin Jin looked around and saw thick layers of snow all around him. The cold wind blew, sending chills down his spine. However, he channeled his blood contract power and borrowed a bit of Xiaohua's strength. Immediately, he felt warm and unafraid of the cold wind. Haha, everyone knows that I, Hui Yuan, am a fire-cultivating true immortal. A fire-cultivating true immortal loves hot places, but I'm going to do the exact opposite. I'm going to hide in this cold place so that no one would suspect me. That's what I call safe, Hui Yuan said with a hint of smugness. Indeed, this was a normal way of thinking. The most dangerous place was also the safest place. However, no one in the world was a fool, especially those who had reached the celestial realm. For example, Sir God Guy, who is extremely intelligent, it would be a joke if he wanted to deceive the other party with such a reverse thinking. However, Lin Jin didn't tell Hui Yuan this. That would be too much of a blow. There was a cave up ahead. Hui Yuan led the two inside. In front of a rock wall, he invoked a spell, and a ring of fire appeared out of thin air. Through the ring of fire, they could see the cave abode hidden in the depths of this snowy mountain. Come on, Hui Yuan said and led the way in. Lin Jin and Northern Qi followed closely behind him. Sure enough, it was a rather well-hidden cave abode. Although it was slightly inferior to God Lord Yan's cave, it was still quite spacious. The temperature inside the cave was obviously higher, but it was also deserted. Other than the three of them, there was no one else here, unlike God Lord Yin, who kept many immortal slaves. This was basically Hui Yuan's home. Since they were already home, Hui Yuan was familiar with the place. He first used a spell to brew a pot of tea for Lin Jin and Northern Qi and Xiangyun before asking them to wait for a moment. Then, he went out and soon returned with a cloth bag. The bag looked tattered, but the immortal energy it exuded told others that this wasn't just any ordinary tattered bag. I used a Cosmos sack in my early years. At that time, I had just stepped into the pseudo-immortal realm. I was so free and unfettered at that time. Sigh. Chapter 670. Lin Jin finally learned how to refine Nine Suns crystals. While it was true that fire-cultivating immortals could refine Nine Suns crystals, it wasn't something that could be done in minutes. Even a fire-cultivating immortal would need some effort to refine Nine Suns crystals. This was largely dependent on the fire-cultivating immortal's cultivation level and proficiency. But to put it simply, using Hui Yuan as an example, it would take him 7 days to refine one Nine Suns crystal. This 7 days would also consume a lot of mana and effort. Generally speaking, it would take Hui Yuan at least 10 years to refine 108 Nine Suns crystal beads. After all, he had other matters to attend to. He couldn't just focus on refining Nine Suns crystals. 10 years was considered fast. Some fire-cultivating immortals would need at least 30 years to refine one prayer bead. In that case, Nine Suns crystals were precious. One might not mean much, but a string of prayer beads made up of more than 100 of them was definitely a priceless treasure. And now, Lin Jin had 2 of these priceless treasures. They were given to him by Hui Yuan. In addition, there was also a string of large Nine Suns crystal beads in his hand. Each bead was the size of a longan, and they glowed brightly, as if they contained red-hot metal balls. Nine Suns crystals were categorized into upper and lower grade. These large Nine Suns crystals were obviously of the upper grade that could only be found by chance. Of course, Hui Yuan wasn't foolish enough to give all the Nine Suns crystals he had to Lin Jin. The 200 or so he had to keep some for himself. There was no need to talk about anything else. If he met another strong enemy, or if he met God's sovereign Yin, Monk Hui Yuan would need 9 Yang crystals to improve his magic techniques. And if he couldn't win, he could use Hua Luo Heaven Evasion. However, the fire evasion required quite a lot of materials. One cast would require 108 Nine Suns crystals. No matter how wealthy Hui Yuan was, he couldn't afford such expenditure. I plan to go into seclusion and refine more Nine Suns crystals to save my life. Things aren't peaceful these days, Hui Yuan said helplessly. Lin Jin agreed with this idea. Had Lin Jin been in her shoes, he would definitely make good use of such an awesome escape technique like the flare evasion. From now on, he wouldn't even dare to step out of the house without 3 Buddha beads around his neck. Now that he had enough Nine Suns crystals, he was short on intense flame pills. Lin Jin asked Northern Shi Xiangyun to help him refine the pills. As for the materials required, Northern Shi had some on hand, and Hui Yuan had some in his cave. Lin Jin estimated that refining 10 intense flame pills shouldn't be a problem. Although this was still far from the 30 pills Lin Jin needed, now wasn't the time to complain. Chapter 672. It was because of this that Sir Godguy's state of mind became unstable. Just as he had speculated, Lin Jin had a carefree immortal backing him, and he could directly interfere with this place through that mysterious door. Lord Yin couldn't figure out the theory behind this, so the situation was clearly disadvantageous to him. If it weren't for the special circumstances, he probably wouldn't have provoked Lin Jin. Now, he had no choice but to rely on Lin Jin to save Huang Yingve. Because Huang Yingve, a monster with dermic voices, was crucial to his plan. She was an indispensable part of it. Since Huang Yingve was still unconscious, it seemed like Lin Jin was the only one who could save her. Hence, Lord Yin brought out his trump card and mobilized all his forces, planning to cut off all means of retreat. To Lord Yin, if they could work together, they would. It would be best if Lin Jin stayed out of their way. If that didn't work, he wouldn't hesitate to take action. Even if Lin Jin had carefree immortal backing him, that wouldn't stop him. This plan was too important to him. Even if he had to take the risk, it was worth it. Moreover, Lord Yin wasn't stupid. Although he didn't understand Lin Jin's plan, nor did he know the rules for opening that mysterious door or the price to pay for it, everything had yin and yang, and balance was important. To be able to open that door, Carefree Immortal must have paid a huge price. Lord Yin even speculated that the Carefree Immortal called Curator wouldn't show himself easily. Otherwise, this world would have belonged to Curator long ago. As for the various rumors about the Curator that Taoist Blackwater and God Lord Hyde had found out about in the Heartlands, God Lord Hyde believed that the Curator had also used an avatar technique. Hence, Lord Yin was cautious while Lord Yin was well prepared. If necessary, he wouldn't hesitate to cut off all means of retreat. If Lord Yin decided to escape, not even Carefree Immortal could stop him. This time, the other 7 immortals that Sir God Yin had brought with him were all top-notch immortals in the foreign area. Each of them had unique skills and extremely powerful magic treasures. Their combat power could almost sweep through the entire foreign area. Apart from a few celestial Dao sects that had deep foundations and were not easy to deal with, the rest of them were unstoppable. At this moment, God Lord Yin calmed himself down. If one were to talk about acting, God Lord Yin was definitely at the level of a best actor. At this moment, he was completely fearless and his expression was natural. Mr. Lin, you left in a hurry. There's still many things I haven't told you. After saying that, he looked at Hui Yuan again. At that moment, God Lord Guy actually laughed and said, Master Hui Yuan, I had a misunderstanding with you before.